Hey, it's Tucker Carlson. There's never been a candidate for president the media hated more than Robert F. Kennedy Jr. You thought that title belonged to Donald Trump. Of course it must, but go check the coverage. Trump got a gentle scalp massage by comparison when he announced. When Trump rolled out his presidential campaign in 2015, the New York Times waited until the 17th paragraph of the story to attack him. But as well known as he is, the paper said at the time, Trump is also widely disliked. And then they cited a poll to back it up. That was the attack on Trump. 8 years later, the Times attacked Bobby Kennedy in the very first sentence of the story. Quote, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the paper declared, announced a presidential campaign on Wednesday built on relitigating COVID-19 shutdowns and shaking Americans' faith in science. Shaking Americans' faith in science. Imagine if you were an ordinary New York Times subscriber reading that over coffee in your pre-war rent-controlled duplex on Columbus Avenue. You'd think Bobby Kennedy just declared war on the Enlightenment. My fellow Americans, I have come to shake your faith in science. Join me as I drag our nation back to the medieval period. You'd be appalled. CBS News viewers likely were appalled. In its coverage of Kennedy's announcement, CBS denounced the candidate's views as, quote, misleading and dangerous. The LA Times called him a threat to democracy. At the offices of National Public Radio in Washington, a full-blown Category 5 hysteria typhoon broke out. NPR devoted an entire segment to savaging Kennedy, not just as a candidate, but as a human being. NPR described him as someone who, for his own perverse reasons, has made, quote, debunked and false and misleading claims that undermine trust in vaccines, and who, in his spare time, provides moral support to crazed extremists who, quote, rally under the banner of what they call liberty or freedom. People magazine didn't even bother to report a single word of anything Kennedy said at his announcement, and instead wrote an entire story about how his relatives hate him. Kennedy's younger sister, Carrie, the magazine reported solemnly, does not approve of Bobby Jr.'s harmful views. His harmful views! Bobby Kennedy's thoughts alone are evil enough to hurt people. That's been the tone of the media coverage around Bobby Kennedy Jr. for the past 18 years, since July of 2005. That's the moment that Kennedy published a magazine article suggesting there might be a link between the rise in diagnosed autism cases and the ever-expanding schedule of mandatory childhood vaccines. The day that story was published, Kennedy's reporting was considered so solid that two outlets ran it simultaneously, Rolling Stone and Salon.com. Unfortunately, neither one of them understood what they were up against. The pharma lobby rolled out the most ferocious public relations campaign in memory, and both publications swiftly caved. Both pulled the story and then disavowed it, groveling as they did. No one in the national media bothered to explain why autism diagnoses had skyrocketed. If it wasn't the vaccines, and maybe it wasn't, then what was it? To this day, there has not been a convincing explanation. Instead, reporters just attack Bobby Kennedy. They've called him a lunatic and a Nazi. Instagram shut down his account. YouTube just last week pulled down a perfectly reasonable interview he did with Jordan Peterson, citing unspecified misinformation, and so on. Kennedy became the most censored famous person in the United States. At this point, most Americans have heard a lot more about Bobby Kennedy Jr. than they've heard from him. He doesn't get many offers to speak from big platforms. But last week, Joe Rogan gave him one. Here's some of what he said.
Why do 5 of my 7 kids have allergies? You know, and of course we know why, because aluminum adjuvants give you allergies. They're designed to make you, to create a hyperimmune response to foreign particles. And the last category is, the allergic diseases, peanut allergies, food allergies, eczema, which I never knew anybody with eczema when I was a kid. I never, asthma, I knew people with asthma, but it wasn't 1 in every 4 black kids like it is today. So, all of those things. Now, we went from 6% of American having chronic disease. By 1986, we're starting to add the vaccines, and we got and 11.8% of kids now, so it's doubled.
Why do 5 of my 7 children have allergies? Now, we don't know the answer, of course, But it's an interesting question. In fact, it's an important question that deserves an adult answer, not that you should hold your breath waiting to get one. Bobby Kennedy asks a lot of questions like that. He notices things. Kennedy pays attention to the world around him, and he wonders why it's changing. He's an outdoorsman, a falconer, and a fly fisherman. He's interested in how nature works. He's curious. Not so long ago, these qualities were considered essential to the practice of science. All scientific discovery comes from observation, empiricism, patient watching. Without the willingness to put aside your pre-assumptions and assess with honesty the things you see and touch and smell, the changes taking place right in front of your face, you can't do science. You can't create art either, or journalism, or theology. You have to be willing to notice the obvious. And when they tell you you're not allowed to notice the obvious, you should be concerned. Imagine you're on a commercial airline flight. The plane is just leveled out at 37,000 feet. You're closing your eyes for a nap. And suddenly you smell smoke. And it's not your imagination. You can see it. It's starting to fill the cabin. All around you, people are hacking and choking. The guy in the next seat has a napkin pressed against his mouth, and he's mumbling what sounds like Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. So clearly, the airplane is on fire. But almost unbelievably, no one has said a word about it. Not a single person is acknowledging this is happening. Everyone is silent. So in panic, you yell for the flight attendant. There's smoke in the cabin, you say, as if she hasn't noticed. But she stares at you with hard eyes. Shut up, racist, she replies. That's a dangerous Russian conspiracy theory. Stop spreading misinformation or I'll call TSA and have you arrested when we land. That sounds like a fever dream, but it's also pretty close to the experience of living in the United States at the moment. All around you, things seem to be fraying and getting worse. Your gut tells you there's something very bad going on, and all the evidence suggests that there is. But the people in charge won't acknowledge that. Everything's fine, they scream. Stop noticing. But wait, I don't remember this many kids having allergies or asthma or eczema or autism or, for that matter, body dysmorphia. And why so many suicides? What's going on here? Shut up, stop asking questions. That's their answer. But Bobby Kennedy won't stop asking, and that's why they hate him. As Kennedy spoke on the Rogan show, a reporter for Vice.com called Anna Merlin was watching. Merlin was so enraged by what she saw that she dashed off an article attacking Joe Rogan's employer for allowing the conversation to take place. Spotify has stopped even sort of trying to stem Joe Rogan's vaccine misinformation, read the headline. The piece never even described much of what Bobby Kennedy had actually said. Merlin dismissed the entire interview as, quote, a detailed survey of Kennedy's most dangerously incorrect views, a far too extensive list to outline in full. In other words, we here at Vice don't have time to describe all of Bobby Kennedy's lies, but trust us, they were lies. Then Merlin called Spotify to see if she could get the episode censored. Much to her profound frustration, Spotify refused to censor the episode and kept the interview on its website. So she spent the next several days ranting about all of this on Twitter. People were listening to the wrong things, and Anna Merlin was mad about it. So was Peter Hotez. Hotez is a pediatrician from Texas who became moderately famous on MSNBC during the COVID lockdowns as a Biden shill and a vaccine promoter. Hotez read Anna Merlin's piece and then huffily retweeted it. Effectively, why is Bobby Kennedy allowed to talk in public? And that gave Joe Rogan an idea. Why not have Peter Hotez debate Bobby Kennedy on his show? You claim he's wrong. Why don't you explain why he's wrong? That seemed fair. But Hotez wouldn't bite. So Rogan offered to give $100,000 to Hotez's favorite charity if he agreed to come on. Soon others made their own pledges and the pot swelled to over $1 million. But still, Peter Hotez wouldn't come. Instead, he scampered back to MSNBC, where one of the channel's oilier hosts assured him he was doing the right thing by dodging the debate. Arguing with Bobby Kennedy is morally equivalent to debating a Holocaust denier, the host said. No decent person would do that. And of course, Hotez agreed. Quote, 200,000 Americans needlessly perished because they believed the anti-vaccine disinformation and refused to take a COVID shot. So really, talking to Bobby Kennedy would be a lot like abetting murder. And Peter Hotez, MD, PhD, was not going to do that. But wait a second, you ask yourself. Let's think about those numbers. 200,000 people died because of vaccine disinformation from Bobby Kennedy and people like him? How do we know that? Is that really science? No. It's not science, because we don't know that. We can't know that. There is no way to know that. Peter Hotez's claim is a political attack posing as science, and he specializes in those. Here he is on television during the so-called pandemic.
It's all about mask compliance. That's going to be absolutely critical, because if you don't have masks, remember, this virus aerosolizes. So even 6 feet is not enough. It can go 17, 18 feet, several meters. What we really have to do is have vaccine mandates in the schools. We should have a rule that anyone who walks into a school over the age of 12 has to be vaccinated. This is the nature of the anti-vaccine movement in this country. It's somehow married now to far right-wing extremism and white nationalist group. Anyone who's unvaccinated and has been lucky enough to escape COVID, your luck is about to run out. And I call it anti-science aggression coming from Senator Rand Paul, Senator Johnson, members of the House of Representatives, in addition to those two senators, are killers.
It's all about mask compliance. We must have vaccine mandates for children. Take the vax or you will die. Anyone who disagrees with me is a white nationalist and a killer, and probably an agent of Putin. Do we say probably? Let's revise that. Certainly an agent of Putin. Again, here is Dr. Peter Hotez.
We're starting to see now those same anti-vaccine messages that's coming out of the U.S. And now we're finding it in Africa and Latin America. And remember, what the other reason we're seeing this is the Putin government has, this has been reported by U.S. and British intelligence, has been piling on with this whole systematic program of what's being called weaponized health communications, trying to destabilize democracies with anti-vaccine, anti-science messages and targeting.
So according to British and U.S. intelligence, anyone who disagrees with Dr. Peter Hotez is a disloyal American working to destabilize our democracy on behalf of Vladimir Putin. Now, by comparison, never in his life has Bobby Kennedy Jr. said anything half that demented. But keep in mind, Peter Hotez claims to have a valid medical license. He is allowed to treat patients. After a while, even MSNBC viewers were going to have some questions about a guy who talks like that, and apparently some of them did. As the lockdowns wore on, the population started to notice that many of the core claims the TV doctors were making were untrue. You'd only need one shot. If you got the shot, you would never get sick. You would never pass the virus to others, and so on. They said these things, as you know, again and again. Ultimately, they were proven wrong, but they never admitted it. They just attacked the people who noticed. Here's Dr. Peter Hotez calling for the Biden administration to arrest anyone who questions the COVID vaccine.
The Biden administration has to realize that anti-science is a killer. Disinformation. Yeah. It's not even just disinformation. This is an anti-science empire right now, and we need Homeland Security. We need the Justice Department. We've really got to figure this out, and Health and Human Services will not be able to figure this out on their own.
It's not a medical problem. It's a law enforcement problem. They've doubted me. Arrest them! It's a horrifying outburst if you think about it. If you were on tape saying something like that, you would be deeply ashamed. But Peter Hotez is not ashamed. He's become even more grandiose. Hotez has written a self-congratulatory new book called The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, a scientist's warning, as if you were a scientist. Here's how Hotez describes himself in the book's promotional literature. Quote, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, one renowned scientist in his famous bow tie, appearing daily on major news networks such as MSNBC, NPR, and BBC, and others, Dr. Peter J. Hotez often went without sleep, working around the clock to develop a nonprofit COVID-19 vaccine and to keep the public informed. During that time, he was one of the most trusted voices on the pandemic and was even nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize for his selfless work. He also became one of the main targets of anti-science rhetoric that gained traction through conservative news media. End quote, though we could go on. So here you have a renowned scientist, selfless, trusted, going without sleep, self-denying, persecuted by extremists for daring to tell the truth. The Albert Schweitzer of cable news. That's Dr. Peter J. Hotez. The fact that a partisan buffoon like Peter Hotez can describe himself this way with a straight face and the backing of a publisher makes you despair for the country's future. But don't despair. There is hope. Hotez will never debate Bobby Kennedy Jr., but it doesn't matter. Kennedy has already won. He's more honest than Dr. Peter Hotez, and that's obvious to anyone who's paying attention. A New Economist poll shows that Kennedy is more popular and far less hated than either major party frontrunner. After almost 20 years of being silenced, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is being heard. And why wouldn't he be? Kennedy's theories about vaccines may be right, they may be partially right, they could be even utterly wrong. No one's proved it either way. But what we can say with certainty is that America's medical establishment has beclowned itself for all time. Its official positions on vaccines, psychiatric drugs, puberty blockers, reassignment surgeries, a long list of other politically fashionable priorities have no connection whatsoever to legitimate science. It's all effectively witchcraft. At the annual meeting of the American Medical Association in Chicago last week, for example, delegates issued a statement attacking the body mass index as a tool of, quote, racist exclusion, which has caused historical harm. Next year, they will denounce thermometers and stethoscopes. They're insane. Compared to them, Bobby Kennedy is a mainstream figure. And people understand that. That's why he's winning. And you know he's winning by how his critics are doing. So just 4 years ago, Anna Merlan was regarded as an important expert on conspiracy theories and misinformation. She'd written a book on the topic. Here she is talking about it.
I've always thought that in the case of conspiracy peddlers, it's not necessarily a super profitable enterprise to ask whether they really believe it or not, because I don't know what's in their hearts. I don't know what's in their minds. All I know is what they spend their time doing, which is promoting conspiracy theories. In the case of ordinary people, conspiracy consumers, and most Americans are, to some degree, consumers of conspiracy theories. All the studies that we have show that like 1 in 3 Americans believe in some conspiracy theory to some extent. For the people in the very sort of deep end of the conspiracy pool, people who are consuming a lot of conspiracy content, I think it's really important to look at the way it helps them make sense of the world and make sense of our political moment and make sense of a lot of times like what's happening in their own lives.
All the studies that we have show that like 1 in 3 Americans believe in some conspiracy theory. Huh? You'll notice the upspeak, the rising inflection at the end of the sentence. That's a familiar tick in Brooklyn. It's designed to turn a declarative sentence into a question and thereby belittle the listener. Do you follow me? Is this too complicated for you? So the lady in the nose ring wants you to know she's smart, but she's not. When Merlan recorded that interview, Vice, where she now works, was valued at more than $5 billion. Genius investors like James Murdoch were showering the company with money. Everyone wanted in on the future of media, which was uptalkers like Anna Merlan lecturing you about racism and misinformation. But that has changed. Last month, Vice filed for bankruptcy. Anna Merlan is still on Twitter screeching about how her critics are transphobic, but nobody cares. Nobody wants to hear from Anna Merlan anymore. The gatekeepers are transparently ridiculous. Everyone can see that. People have started to notice. Tucker Carlson tonight. On Tuesday, 2 days ago, Twitter slapped a warning label on all tweets from National Public Radio. Going forward, NPR will be identified for users of Elon Musk's social media site as, quote, state-affiliated media. That is the same category as Russia Today or China Central Television. It means that NPR is not that different from the Tehran Times, with the exception, of course, being less accurate and more anti-American. So that happened on Tuesday. Why are we telling you about it? With all the momentous changes underway around the world, why would we open a show with a story about Twitter recategorizing NPR as state media? Well, because it's true. That's the reason. Finally, thankfully, somebody in authority has told the truth about something, and that is thrilling to see on its own terms. In a world defined by lies from our leaders, this seemed like a rare sign of hope and progress. Telling the truth is the most revolutionary act of all, far more than taking up arms. And yet, you rarely see it. Human beings created language in order to describe the world around them more precisely than they could with, say, grunting or sign language. But unfortunately, we've been subverting our own creation ever since. But not tonight. By calling National Public Radio what it is, Elon Musk has used English as it was intended to be used in order to tell the truth. Of course, NPR is state media. Have you listened to it? It has all the hallmarks: repetitive dishonesty, authoritarian politics, unwavering devotion to the party in charge. Of course, that could describe virtually all media in this country. The difference is the state actually pays for NPR. NPR was created more than 50 years ago by a law signed by Democrat Lyndon Johnson. It was called the Public Broadcasting Act. And from its very first day, NPR was wholly dependent on tax dollars in order to exist. And it still is. Federal funding is essential to NPR, explains NPR's own website. So there's no factual debate about that fact, but there is a great deal of lying about it. Every year, NPR lobbyists head to Capitol Hill to demand more tax dollars. Democracy can't exist without us, they screech, while simultaneously at the very same time telling you at high volume that NPR takes virtually no tax money. So we don't need federal subsidies, don't even want them really, but you have to increase them. That is NPR's line, and has been for decades under the political leadership of both parties. And it's essentially unchallenged by anyone. It just stays. Wars and recessions come and go, but NPR funding remains. But after more than half a century, it is very clear that there is nothing public about National Public Radio. NPR is the radio station of permanent Washington. That's who pays for it, that's who benefits from it. By adding 3 simple words to NPR's tweets, Elon Musk exposed that forever to the world. Such is the power of truth. It exposes, and of course, it infuriates those who are exposed. So NPR howled in outrage, but with its signature pursed-lipped fussiness. Here's a direct quote from a piece on NPR's website, which really does belong in the Museum of Uptight Liberalism. Quote, NPR officials have asked Twitter to remove the label. They initially assumed it was applied by mistake, NPR spokesperson Isabel Lara said. We were not warned. It happened quite suddenly last night, Lara said. In response to an NPR email for the story seeking comment and requesting details about what in particular might have led to the new designation, Twitter's press account auto-replied with a poop emoji. Well, it's just so perfect you couldn't improve it. Hey, Twitter, stop calling us what we are. Okay, NPR, here's a scat cartoon. So you can forget the rockets and the electric cars. Elon Musk is a hero for this alone. But NPR wasn't finished. It still had fight. National Public Radio was so angry, so enraged to be called state media, that its supporters enlisted the help of the regime's top spokeswoman to claim otherwise. Stop calling it propaganda, said the propagandist. Again, it's an irony-free zone and just too great. Watch this.
There's no doubt of the independence of NPR's journalists, and it has been. If you've ever been on the receiving end of their questions, you know this. You know that they have their independence in journalism. NPR journalists work diligently to hold public officials accountable and inform the American people. The hard-hitting independence nature of their coverage speaks for itself, and so I'll leave it there.
That is so Baghdad Bob. It's unbelievable. Here she is reading a press release for NPR that tells us they're famous for hard-hitting independence, which speaks for itself. Really? How many tough questions have they asked you, Karina Jean-Pierre? Not a single one. They're fluffing her every day. She's so smart. And so she pays them back. Hard-hitting independence. This is the same radio station that in the final days of the last presidential campaign took a look at the biggest political story in years, the New York Post story on Hunter Biden's laptop, and then ignored it completely. And not only ignored it completely, but because they are fussy and self-righteous to their very core, they bragged about how they were ignoring it completely. We don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories, said NPR's managing editor Terrence Samuel. And we don't want to waste listeners' and readers' time on stories that are just pure distractions. All right. 2 weeks before our presidential campaign, we find out that the Democratic candidate has been taking money from a foreign adversary, but that's just a distraction. So whatever happened to Terrence Samuel? What did he get in return for helping Joe Biden become president at the state-affiliated media network he serves? Well, Terrence Samuel has since been promoted to NPR's executive editor. But he still has time to spare because it's not that hard to put Morning's Edition on the air. So you know what he does in his spare time? Terrence Samuel hosts seminars on, we're quoting, disinformation and democracy. It's something called American University. And no, we're not making any of this up. Nor are we fabricating NPR's report from just last month that informed us male athletes have no inherent performance advantages over female athletes. None at all. That is a fact, ladies and gentlemen. Men and women are physically the same size. They have the same muscle mass. There is no difference whatsoever in their bone structure. We checked with experts. So, as you know, NPR is famous for its widely respected science coverage. But that's not the only reason that NPR is now the go-to news source for unhappy female attorneys over 50. No, there's more to it than that. They're the lifestyle pieces, the features, as they used to say in the newspaper business. Here's a piece, for example, on how one African-American Barbie doll, ahead of its time in the toy industry, changed the life of a Latinx girl forever.
I remember this one Christmas, my cousin's father gifted us all Barbies. And when everyone was unwrapping, you know, the excitement, el papel, the paper, and I opened up the Barbie and my Barbie was black, you know? And everyone kind of like looked at my Barbie and I looked at their Barbies and I could kind of like identify to their Barbies too. And I wasn't this kind of like as melanated as this Barbie. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am different.
Unhappy middle-aged ladies talking about themselves. The narcissism piped directly into your Audi. That's NPR. You got to say they know their audience. They don't only serve their audience, they put their audience on the air. So it's kind of a continuous loop. The snake eating its own tail. So you probably shouldn't be too surprised that with an audience like its, desperately unhappy, barren personal life audience, that NPR is all in on the question of romance novels. Watch.
I'm like really big in the sci-fi ones. One of the books was a gay couple and one of them was a kraken. And I didn't want that to unlock something in me. Unfortunately, it did. Before I knew what was happening, Cyrus was carrying me, the muscular links of his tentacles supporting our combined weight, and shuffling us towards the stall without breaking our kiss. I knew he was strong, but I didn't think he was that strong. You like that, Rollins? He asked, as his tentacles slammed the door to the shower stall open, and we stumbled inside.
Well, so it's tentacle porn. Okay, yeah, I mean, technically it is tentacle porn, which is its own subgenre, and we're not going to pollute your mind by telling you any more about it than that. But what it really is narcissism. Because here you have an upper-income Oberlin graduate talking about, what would he be talking about? Well, himself, of course, because that's what NPR listeners want to hear about themselves. And that's the real journalism, the hard-hitting independent journalism Karine Jean-Pierre was touting from the White House briefing room. And NPR didn't just start doing it after they got Joe Biden elected. They've been doing it for generations. Their health coverage in particular stands out. Any news organization can run a piece on how to be more healthy, but only NPR dared to affirm the snack habits of its listeners by telling you, yeah, go ahead and be fat. Here's an anti-diet dietitian.
So diet culture is this overarching system of beliefs and values that's really endemic to Western culture at this point in history.
Christy Harrison is an anti-diet registered dietitian with a master's in public health.
We've been trying to get Christy Harrison, the anti-diet dietitian, on our show for years now, but we're not NPR, so no luck so far. But if you're looking for coverage of LGBTQIA Z+ issues, well, you've come to the right place, because it's not just the conventional stuff, gay marriage or trans issues. They've taken it to another level, as befits a cutting-edge, totally independent news channel like National Public Radio. Here they are reporting on trans dinosaur experts.
Many people who are queer, whether they are trans or some other form of genderqueer or whatever it is, we love dinosaurs.
Along with being a dinosaur expert, Riley is herself transgender. And according to Riley, there is a whole community of genderqueer dinosaur enthusiasts online. We had no idea, so we checked it out. Sure enough, they're there. We found dozens of paleo artists online that identify as queer.
Type dinosaur into the LGBT subreddit, hundreds of results with pride dinos, rainbow dinos, dino moms, dino dads, and a lot of puns. Like Allosaurus.
Transceratops.
Transceratops. Transosaurus rex. Now, a lot of people say if the topic of NPR comes up in conversation, yeah, I'm all for National Public Radio and I'm happy to work an extra day a year to pay for it. But I'm not a trans dinosaur. I'm not. So what's in it for me as a non-trans dinosaur? That seems a little niche. And that's a common misperception about National Public Radio. As long as you're talking about yourself and doing so in a self-satisfied, completely out-of-touch way, NPR is the station for you. In other words, they're interested in all forms of diversity. Back in 2021, NPR discovered a trendy new television show. Why'd they like it? Well, here's why.
Well, Kumari, what TV show were you binging this year?
I was watching We Are Lady Parts. It's a musical comedy about a punk band in London that is made up of all Muslim women.
What are you watching? That's the hard-hitting news coverage that makes the difference between democracy and tyranny. What are you watching? Self-satisfied, fussy people with nose piercings talking about what they're watching in their tiny little apartments in Brooklyn. Well, I'm watching a musical, an all-Muslim trans musical, a punk band. It's great. So that's NPR in 2023. And the truth is, NPR's always been kind of awful, kind of unbearable, kind of cringy, as they say. But now, you can't even listen to it because the people who work there are deranged. They're ideologues. And ideologues, of course, in the end, go crazy and start attacking each other. The revolution inevitably eats its own. And we're seeing that on display now and, frankly, kind of enjoying it. So after NPR laid off 10% of its staff recently, one NPR show called Louder Than a Riot, Louder Than a Riot, they love riots at NPR, tweeted this, and we're quoting, "The hardest part is that our SZN, if you're not Hungarian, you probably know what that means. We certainly don't. Our SZN is about misgenre queer trans black women face in hip-hop. Yet within NPR, the majority impacted in these layoffs were queer POC staff and programs." In other words, racist! By the way, misgenre, in case you aren't up on your NPR speak, has something to do with bigotry against women who are black. Not that NPR bothers to define any of those terms. Anyway, it gets better, because once you put crazy people in charge of your newsroom, well, crazy things happen. So they tried to call an all-hands meeting to explain why people were being fired. The real reason, of course, is no one wants to listen to this crap. But an NPR executive had to get out there and try to speak slowly and tell these people why they were fired. And people start screaming at him. So he called for civility. And then one employee said, "You need to read this piece." Quote, "When civility is used as a cudgel against people of color." That's NPR, ladies and gentlemen, on the inside. NPR, by the way, we told you at the outset, is now officially state media. And honestly, that tells you a lot about the state. Vince Colonnese is a radio host in Washington, D.C., a very popular one, deservedly so, and he joins us tonight to assess NPR. Now, you live in Washington, you report on it on the radio. Was there ever a question in your mind that this was state media?
Not at all. Our mutual buddy Chris Plant calls them National Panhandler Radio, appropriately, NPR. And you know what's amazing about this? They're trying to prove that they're not state media, and they're relying on everyone who's funded by the state in order to make that defense. So Karine Jean-Pierre stands there at the White House press briefing and says NPR is so independent. She gives a Braveheart-style speech attesting to their independence. Do you think she would ever do that for Simon Atiba? Like, not in a million years. No. Not in a million years. Of course, it's for NPR. NPR cited Yoel Roth, the former head of censorship at Twitter, as a guy who said they shouldn't be labeled state-affiliated media. Yoel Roth and Twitter at the time were making millions of dollars from the federal government to censor the American public. These are all completely biased people. And one last big thing that I noticed about this, Tucker, they say in all of their defenses, well, only 1% of our funding, less than 1%, comes from the federal government. Even that is deception. Even that is a lie. NPR is a content organization. The 1,000 member stations that they send content to all pay fees to NPR. Guess where they get their money from? That's right, the federal, state, and local governments. As much as 23% of all of their funding comes from there. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, and here they are playing a shell game. And the only type of organization that plays that kind of deceptive shell game, not a news organization, one that is running a political operation on behalf of the government.
It's totally right. NPR is repulsive, but not quite as repulsive as its listeners, the most privileged people in the world demanding welfare from the rest of us. Vince Colonnese, who is on commercial radio, not working for the state. Appreciate seeing you tonight. Thank you.
Good to see you.
A quick programming note. On Tuesday, we'll be heading down to the east coast of Florida to speak to Donald Trump, who's currently the frontrunner in the Republican presidential race, was just, as you know, indicted this week. This will be Donald Trump's first interview since everything happened, his arraignment in New York. That'll air here, 8 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday night. So we told you very briefly about this Wisconsin Supreme Court election this week that'll determine what the voting laws are in that swing state in the next presidential election. How did the Democrat win despite a history of doing things that most people find totally immoral? Well, there's a reason, and we'll tell it to you after the break. Plus, you'll never guess who the Biden administration is blaming for its disastrous pullout from Afghanistan. Who did that but them? Well, they've got an answer. We'll be right back. This week, as you may have heard, Democrats took control of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and that has major ramifications for the 2024 presidential election in a key swing state, which is why they wanted that seat so badly. So voter ID will be shut down, which will allow fraud. That's the whole point of getting rid of voter ID, to commit more fraud. So how did Democrats win? Well, there are probably a lot of different explanations, but one of them is they benefited from a scheme to pay voters with an app. Fox's Trace Gallagher has the story for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker. So going into the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, the balance of the court was 4-3 leaning conservative. The race was between conservative Judge Dan Kelly and liberal Judge Janet Protasiewicz. Now, a group called Wisconsin Takes Action was offering voters up to $250 to influence their family and their friends to vote. The Wisconsin Takes Action website doesn't mention Protasiewicz by name, but it does say, quote, "We are ready for a progressive majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court." In other words, the group was betting that voters could do the math. And here's how the deal worked. Wisconsin Takes Action set up an Empower app. If you download the app, you get $30. If you provide 75 names and phone numbers, you get an additional $60 gift card. And each time you reach out to a friend or acquaintance to vote, you get more gift cards until you reach $250. The Wisconsin Republican Party filed a complaint with the State Ethics Commission, and GOP state lawmakers and other groups have called it outright bribery. And Wisconsin statute 1211 appears to support that, saying that it is a violation or bribe for any person who, quoting here, offers, gives, lends, or promises to give or lend or endeavors to provide anything of value. $250 would fall under that anything of value category. It's also notable that in this election, half of Judge Protasiewicz's campaign contributions came from outside the state of Wisconsin. Only 19% of Judge Kelly's came from outside the state. She won, he lost. You will hear more about this. Tucker.
Only 18%. That's unbelievable. Trace Gallagher, thanks for that informative report tonight. Appreciate it. So the pullout from Afghanistan under Joe Biden was one of the most humiliating foreign policy disasters in American history. It's hard to think of one more humiliating. 13 American servicemen killed, thousands of American citizens left behind. Many Afghans died, by the way. Some of them fell off airplanes. Others were blown up in drone strikes for no obvious reason by the Biden administration. And maybe worst of all, we turned the Taliban into the best armed military force after Pakistan in the entire region. Joe Biden did that his first summer as president. So what does the administration have to say about this? Well, in a new report, they take no responsibility whatsoever. Instead, they blame it on, somehow, Donald Trump. So today, Fox's Peter Doocy asked John Kirby, how does that make sense? Watch.
You admit that the intel was bad. So how can President Biden ever trust when they come into the Oval Office with the PDB that anything in there is legit?
What I said was
that intelligence is a mosaic. What if the mosaic, all the pieces are incorrect?
What I said was intelligence is hard business, and they get it right a lot too. There were some pieces here that weren't accurate. This document and this effort isn't about accountability today. This is the next muscle movement in what will be a long process to better understand and comprehend and adjust to what we learned and what we did in Afghanistan.
There were children being killed. There were people hanging off of Air Force jets that were leaving, and you're saying that you guys are proud of the way that this mission was conducted?
Doesn't mean
of that?
Proud of the fact that we got more than 124,000 people safely out of Afghanistan? You bet. Proud of the fact that we now have about 100,000 Afghans, our former allies and partners, living in this country and working towards citizenship? You bet. But does that mean that everything went perfect in that evacuation? Of course not.
Few things more degrading to the reputation, hard-earned reputation of the American Armed Services than having a shameless liar like that man, John Kirby, speaking on its behalf. Joe Kent carried a weapon in combat zones for most of his life. He's a retired Green Beret combat veteran, also a former candidate for Congress. He joins us tonight. Joe Kent, thank you so much for coming on. So what do you, as someone who spent a lot of his life in that region, what do you make of this explanation?
Well, first off, Tucker, all the Democrats and Joe Biden are trying to do right now is avoid accountability, shift it back to President Trump. And that's because House Republicans have finally started putting some pressure on the Biden administration, demanding for accountability. So that's the knee-jerk reaction. But this is a complete and total disgrace. Look, I would have a lot more respect for the Biden administration if they went after the military-industrial complex and the intelligence community for their lies. This all goes back to when President Trump attempted to get us out of Afghanistan. He fought us to the negotiations table. And that's when the intelligence community and the military-industrial complex lied to the American people. They leaked it to the media that Putin had put bounties on the heads of American soldiers, the whole Russian bounty narrative. And then Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, moved to block Trump from spending money to get us out of Afghanistan in the summer-fall timeframe of 2020. We should have been out then. We had a plan. But then Biden came in and he couldn't do Trump's plan. He wanted to get our troops out on his timeline in September 11th of 2021. And the military-industrial complex continued to lie, this time to Joe Biden. You kept hearing those rosy assessments of how the Afghan military was going to hold the ground and they were going to stand and fight for months on end. They lied, and Americans died as a result. Someone must be held accountable.
Yeah. So you know what happened. You personally, Joe Kent, know what happened and almost uniquely are brave enough to tell the truth about it. And this is why they prevented you from winning that seat in Congress in one of the most rotten elections I've ever seen. And so I hope you'll be running again and continuing to tell the truth. Joe Kent, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker. I will.
So you'd think the price of college, since the economy is teetering, would be coming down, but it's higher than ever. So you have to ask, what will happen when artificial intelligence replaces maybe most of the entry-level white-collar jobs that these students are going to college to try to get? Is anyone thinking this through? Mike Rowe is thinking it through. He joins us next. Some people still seem to want to get their kids into Princeton, but you got to wonder what's going to happen to universities. College enrollment dropped nearly 10% since COVID. That's the steepest drop ever. The elite universities obviously are becoming completely intolerant. You would never send your kids there if you thought about it. And they're also more expensive than they've ever been. Brown, which is sort of a college in Providence, Rhode Island, costs $85 grand for 1 year. Other schools in the same category cost $90 grand. So how many of the people who go to these schools and graduate are going to find out the hard way that AI has eliminated their jobs? People should be thinking about this. Mike Rowe is the host of How America Works on Fox Business, and he has thought about it. He joins us tonight. Mike, thanks for coming on. So this is one category of concerns about artificial intelligence. And thank you for bringing this up. It's got to affect the job prospects of kids graduating from these schools, no?
I think it's got to affect everything. And I'm not sure it's a category unto itself. I was thinking of it really in terms of like a cousin to technology and robotics and automation and all of the things that have been hastened In part, I think, because there's been a big push for a much higher minimum wage than we're accustomed to. But, the unintended consequences of hastening tech has done a lot to eliminate many, many entry-level jobs. This thing feels different to me. This feels like it's coming at it from the other side of the brain. And if it takes root and accelerates the way people are saying it's going to, then I think you're going to see a lot of white-collar jobs eliminated in the same way and at the same time. And as you know, I'm a Pollyanna, always a glass half full kind of guy, and I'm looking for a silver lining in it. And if there is one, maybe that pincer movement will push us back into thinking about making things again on a factory, with a factory state of mind, right? And by the same token, AI is kind of like outsourcing in a way. And my foundation always tries to look at jobs that you can't outsource: plumbing, steam fitting, pipe fitting, welding, and so forth. Maybe we'll start to see the same thing as we get off of Chinese independence, I hope, at least with regard to what we decide to manufacture for ourselves.
So I remember worrying and talking to you years ago about the idea AI would replace, say, truck drivers. But it seems at this point, who knows, but it seems like a bigger threat to junior lawyers.
Yeah, right. Because I think, with truck drivers and pilots and things like that, it's not enough to simply have the tech in place. You're going to have to convince a lot of human beings that it's okay to be driving down the highway and look over and see nobody behind the wheel of the 18-wheeler. That's going to take more time, I think, paradoxically, than the underlying tech will require. To your point, what's going on right now, everything I've read and everybody I've listened to who I respect is talking about this thing on an accelerant unlike anything we've seen before. It's reading our minds, and it's churning out a better work product in many cases than we're capable of. So, I think a lot of people are thinking about tapping the brakes.
Yeah, I hope so. We're going to do a lot more on this, and I hope you'll come back to talk about it. Mike Rowe, thank you.
Anytime.
So Politico is a newsletter based in Northern Virginia that takes millions from creepy big companies to shill for their issues in front of the Congress. Politico calls itself a news organization, but inside, it's really run like NPR. Amber Athey has obtained a list of words Politico reporters are not allowed to use, and that list includes, standbys like mankind and third world countries, biological gender, and pro-life. This is part of a much bigger trend that Amber has exposed. Her reporting can be found in the new book, The Snowflakes Revolt: How Woke Millennials Hijacked American Media. She joins us tonight. Amber, thanks so much for coming on, and congrats on the book. So Politico seems or poses as a kind of, really it's just a corporate shill machine, but it poses as a news organization. How can they ban English language words?
It's truly incredible. Places like the New York Times and the Washington Post get a lot of flack, and rightfully so, but Politico has kind of been flying under the woke radar, and this style guide is really just indicative of a larger trend at that publication. They also brought in several transgender activists to lecture the reporting staff on how they were allowed to write on transgender issues, with one of the individuals who was leading that charge actually telling the reporters that it is a violation of journalistic ethics to report on both sides of the transgender issue. And one reporter was even suggested to have sensitivity readers go over her future articles because she had dared to quote conservatives in an article on transgenderism.
It's crazy how little self-respect they have, or dignity, but do I get to show up at Politico or the Washington Post and tell them they're not allowed to criticize Fox News? Since when are activists allowed to ban criticism of themselves?
It's truly incredible. The idea that this person would go in, her name is Kate Sozin, by the way. She's with the 13th, which is an LGBTQ advocacy group. She went in lecturing about journalistic ethics. Well, where is the journalistic ethics in even allowing activists to tell reporters how they're allowed to write on issues in the first place? The entire dynamic is totally backwards, and it's all in response to this woke millennial takeover of newsrooms, where the people who we used to deride as snowflakes have now instituted mob politics all across major American institutions, including the media.
That's totally right. That term snowflake never described them accurately. They're thugs. Amber Athey with a new book out on this topic. I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So artificial intelligence, as you heard in our conversation with Mike Rowe, is accelerating so fast that even some people in the tech business are really worried. But Bill Gates not worried because he's going to get rich from it. More on that next. So people have been talking at the margins about AI, artificial intelligence, for quite some time, and all of a sudden you have a chance to test it with various chatbots like ChatGPT. And if you have, you know how bizarre and unsettling and honestly amazing, but scary this technology is. It's lots of different things. So ChatGPT will lie to you in the service of neoliberal ideology, just flat out lies. It's supposed to be all-knowing. It's all deceiving, actually. Elon Musk and Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak have both called for a 6-month pause on the development of AI because it could end humanity. And they're serious about it. They understand it, and they're really, really worried. But Bill Gates, who founded Microsoft, which is benefiting from AI, says, no way, no pause, onward into the unknown. Eddie Scarry is the author of Liberal Misery. He joins us to decide who's on the right side tonight. Eddie, thanks so much for coming on. So you have two of the biggest names in technology, founders, as they say in Silicon Valley, each taking a polar side of this issue. Who do you think is right?
Well, I think if any of your viewers want to live a happy, healthy, sane life, you can pretty much always do the opposite of whatever Bill Gates says.
We've so seen
we saw during the pandemic that this is a person who is completely motivated and will say whatever it is that's in his own business interest. You know, it's, oh, get the shots, get all the vaccines you can, get 3, get 4, get 5, and as he's lining its pockets with pharmaceutical money. I think that there should be no reason to trust him anymore after that. When he says, and it's not that I put a bunch of faith in these tech overlords like Elon Musk and others, but it turns out that with this technology, what we have seen is the people who are enmeshed in it and saw what was coming, even they were surprised by it. The people who developed this stuff, there were glitches with it. You had these bots saying, "Oh, we're gonna release more viruses on the world. We would like to destroy the world, live independently." And then even the people who created those things say, "Oh, that's just a glitch, and we didn't mean for that to happen. We don't know what that is. We're gonna fix it." I mean, if a 6-month pause is all we can ask for, and Bill Gates says the opposite, no, I think we need to at least take 6 months, at least.
So Elon Musk said something really interesting the other day. He said, for all human history, human beings have had the highest known intelligence. And now we've created something that has higher intelligence than us, and maybe we should think through the consequences of that for a second before proceeding?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think again, when you have this machine that these people have made, that even they are looking at and saying, wait, we didn't realize it was going to do that. Wait, actually, you played with it for too long. We didn't anticipate that happening. And it's having these conversations in ways that are almost manipulating what we think and what we see and what we know to be true. Yeah, that's a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, if I got in my new car and suddenly it became a submarine without telling me, I'd hang up the car keys for a while and try to figure out what went wrong. You know,
exactly.
I mean, for sure. Eddie Scarry, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we want to end the show tonight with an update from the natural world, what still matters, even with AI. So if you've got a bee infestation, you're probably tempted to just kill all the bees. But there is another option. You don't have to kill all the bees, and actually a lot of bees are dying anyway, so care about the bees, says a bee removal expert who will join us next to explain why you should care about the bees. We'll be right back. The editors at Jeff Bezos' Washington Post spend all day, every day, trying to think up new ways to humiliate and degrade the American population. But this week, they've outdone themselves. Fox's Kevin Corke has a report. Hey, Kevin.
You just never know what you're going to find in the Post, Tucker. Now, critics argue that climate activists have already targeted SUVs and gas-powered cars, gas ranges, even the food you eat, but now they're coming after your bathroom tissue. Sort of. The Post has a climate coach columnist, a guy named Michael Corrin. In a provocative column, he advocates that Americans give up on TP and switch to bidets. He says it'll save millions of trees. Now, before you roll your eyes or throw rolls of TP at the TV, apparently sales of bidets have leapt in the U.S. some tenfold since the pandemic. They range in price from $30 to $21 grand. But most Americans don't know a bidet from a beignet. So what gives? Tucker.
I think most Americans don't want to find out, and they go with the pastry over the weird squirting toilet any day. Kevin Cork, great to see you.
You too.
So most people see bees as pests and want to kill them as quickly as they can. Dennis Langlois of Orlando, Florida has a very different approach. He is a humane bee removal expert. He's been doing it for more than a decade. He's known as the bee guy. He joins us to explain why he takes this approach. Dennis, thanks so much for coming on. Well, I see you're protected. So why people see bees, they want to spray them with a can of poison and kill them. Why should they not do that?
Well, two reasons. Number one is, as a homeowner, the last thing you want to do is leave a bee's nest inside your structure. It'll cause more problems than you could ever imagine. And the other reason is because they're honeybees, and so rather than having them killed, there's a beekeeper that would happily remove and relocate those bees, and we do that all day, every day.
So how do you, I'm just assuming that bees don't want to be gentrified and move to a new neighborhood. So how do you convince them to leave?
Well, it's a physical process. So we essentially evict them. We physically remove their nest, putting it into a beehive. And during the process, we use a special vacuum designed to vacuum the bees up and not hurt them. And once they're brought back to the farm, then we relocate the bees from the vacuum with the nest and put everybody back together and put them to work.
How mad are they when they get out of the vacuum?
You'd be surprised at how gentle they are. So most of the time we don't have to wear a suit or a veil or any protective clothing during the entire process.
Because they're just totally defeated? Like they got vacuumed at that point, they just give up? It seems like they should sting you.
No, that's not. No, it's just a matter of knowing the insects and keeping them calm.
How important, and obviously you have a reason to promote bees. I'm very pro-bee myself, I'll just say it. But why are bees important?
Well, they produce 1/3 of the food we eat, at least. And of course, they also make honey, which is a sweet, delicious treat everybody enjoys.
So if any group, if we were to locate any group in the world that produces 1/3 of the food we eat, we'd obviously want to treat them like they were private equity barons or hedge fund managers. Like we'd treat them with a lot of respect. But we don't. Why?
I would think so. I think it's just some people have a fear of bees, and their knee-jerk reaction is when they see a nail, they go get a hammer.
Yeah, I think that's right. Or a can of bug spray. How much honey do you eat?
I eat honey every single day, all the time.
Do you really? You look.
I love it on ice cream.
Yeah. Honey on ice cream, but you're obviously wearing a full suit. We can't really see your outline, but you seem like a pretty slender, fit character. How do you eat honey every day and maintain your girlish figure?
I work hard every day. I wake up at 5 a.m. and I don't stop until about 6 a.m.
Yeah. Well, you're making the world better. Unlike most people. Maybe even talk show hosts. So, Dennis Langlois, our respect to you. Thank you for coming on tonight.
Have a sweet day.
You too. Well, we are out of time. Unfortunately, I want to remind you we're going to be speaking to the presidential frontrunner on the Republican side who's just been indicted, we believe unfairly, Donald Trump. It'll be Donald Trump's first interview. Welcome to a special edition of Tucker Carlson tonight. Happy Good Friday. This is the saddest and at the same time by far the most hopeful day on the Christian calendar. There was a time not so long ago when the overwhelming majority of Americans observed Good Friday. They got up, they went to church, they talked about it at the office and at dinner that night. It was part of their culture. That's no longer true. Tonight, you wonder how many Americans even know it's Good Friday. So after hundreds of years, this has finally become a non-Christian country. But it's not a secular country. You sometimes hear people call it that, but they are wrong. There are no secular countries. Every country has a religion because every person has a religion, even if it's atheism. Everybody worships something. We're born that way. We can't get away from it. So what is America's religion now? Well, as it happens, we have video. This is from St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Fargo, North Dakota. It was taken on April 2nd. That was the first Sunday after the mass killing in Nashville, in which 3 adults and 3 children were murdered at a Christian school for being Christians. In the old America, Christian pastors would have preached about this. They would have acknowledged the evil on display, and they would have prayed for those who'd been killed. A form of that is still happening today, but the roles have been inverted. In America's new religion, the victims are not the children who died in Nashville. The victim is the woman who killed them. Because Audrey Hale called herself transgender, she was, by definition, a holy martyr. Watch this pastor in a formerly Christian church compare Audrey Hale to Jesus.
Leaders were looking for any excuse, valid or not, to crucify Jesus. And they found that reason. It's baffling to me that someone's existence can be so threatening that people decide they need to be controlled, that they need to have laws made against them, or even worse, that the people that they find to be so threatening should die.
So Audrey Hale's very existence as a transgender person was so threatening to authorities that they killed her, just as the Pharisees killed Jesus. Her death had nothing to do with the fact she just murdered 6 people. That was the pastor's sermon at St. Mark's in Fargo. So it's pretty clear that St. Mark's Lutheran Church is no longer a Christian church. So what is it now? Well, it's a transgenderist church, one of many. Transgenderism is this country's fastest growing religion. Like many faiths, its theology features a supernatural transfiguration, the moment a person is transmogrified from one sex to another. Converts to this faith abandon their old lives and embrace an entirely new self. Their former identities no longer exist. They're dead names. But here's one big difference. Transgenderists do not believe in the God of monotheism. They believe that they themselves are God with the power to control nature. And if you think about it, this should be a concern because it's a recipe for extremism. People who believe that they're God tend to react very badly when told that they're not. So if you're running the government and you wanted to prevent violence in your own country, you would be very concerned about the growth of a cult like this. But the Biden administration is not concerned at all. In fact, it is cheering this cult on. Watch Joe Biden's spokeswoman, just days after the massacre of children in Nashville, explain that when transgenderists, quote, fight back, she approves.
14 states have now banned gender-affirming health care, while some of these laws are currently blocked by courts. This is a dangerous attack. This is awful news. Let's be very clear about that. LGBTQI+ kids are resilient. They are fierce. They fight back. They're not going anywhere. And we have their back. This administration has their back.
They are fierce. They fight back. This administration has had back. So this is coming on the heels just days after a massacre in which children were murdered, apparently in response to laws against chemical and surgical castration of children. So the White House is not decrying that. The White House is endorsing it as clearly as it possibly could. And that's why no one from the Biden White House is visiting the grieving Christian families in Nashville. Instead, today, Kamala Harris went to Nashville to promote 3 Democratic Party legislators who led a riot at the State House, a riot designed to promote, yes, the cult of transgenderism. So consider the message here. We're on your side, and not only we're on your side, you, the mentally ill who may be armed, are the victims, and you are being genocided. Your very existence is at stake. In other words, making paranoid people on the edge more paranoid. So fight back. You are fierce. This is not the message to give to religious nuts with weapons, and particularly not this group of religious nuts with weapons. This is a group that has for years been committing acts of violence at rates much higher than you would expect across a cross-section of the population. To give a few examples, last year a trans girl tried to assassinate a justice, Brett Kavanaugh, at his home. Then a self-described non-binary shooter, also a member of the cult, murdered 5 people at a Colorado nightclub. In 2019, a trans teenager shot 9 people in a high school, killing 1. That was in Denver. In 2018, a mentally ill transgenderist shot up a Rite Aid distribution center in Aberdeen, Maryland. That massacre killed 4. So you can see where this is going, and you shouldn't be surprised by it. Mental illness leads to violence. This is a species of mental illness, and there's no mental illness greater than the delusion that you are God. And that's exactly what this cult teaches its adherents. You are God. You can change nature with your will. Change biology. Now, with the endorsement of the Biden administration, the terrorism that is the inevitable result of this belief system is accelerating. Police just arrested a man called William Whitworth. He's a transgenderist, uses the name of Lily, in the state of Colorado. Apparently he had a kill list and a manifesto. He was planning to attack 3 schools and churches, and apparently some talk show hosts too. So it would be nice to see this manifesto or the kill list, but of course you can't see it because the authorities are, as they have in Nashville, hiding it. Now, why are they hiding it? Because they have to. When your religious views violate the unyielding laws of nature itself, you have no choice but to hide things. You have to. Deception is mandatory, and it will soon be reflected in the law. That is already happening in Canada, which is in some sense the new California. If you want to know our future, look north, not west. In Canada, transgenderism will soon be the justification for suspending all freedom of speech. A new law will ban speech that offends transgenderists near drag performances. So you can't complain. Watch.
The drag communities are done waiting for this government to take real action in effective ways, and so is the Ontario NDP. The proposed legislation does 2 things, and I will go through them. Firstly, it enables the Attorney General to create a 2S LGBTQI+ community safety zone to prohibit within 100 meters of the property any homophobic, transphobic act of intimidation, threat, offensive threats, offensive remarks, protest, disturbance, and distribution of hate propaganda within the meaning of the criminal code. It also comes with it a penalty of $25,000 if prosecuted successfully.
So here's a rule of thumb that is worth tacking on your refrigerator because it explains so much. If the people who claim to be victims are working to oppress you, they're not actually victims. They are oppressors. And once again, with this cult specifically, that is inevitable because at its core is a provable lie, defied and revealed by the unchanging laws of science. We do not have the power to change our sex. It is in our DNA. It is in our bone structure. You dig up a fossilized skeleton thousands of years later, and you can tell it's sex. We can't change that, much as we might want to, much as we might feel deep sympathy for those who want to. We still can't change it. That is true. And so, of course, they have to criminalize your observing that it's true, because that is a challenge to the core of their faith. These are religious extremists on a jihad against the population, and in order to win, they have to force everyone to lie, period. But there are always a few who refuse, no matter what, to lie. And one of those is Riley Gaines. So last year, Riley Gaines was a collegiate swimmer at the University of Kentucky. During an NCAA championship, she and her teammates were forced to compete against a man called William Thomas. Now, there's been a lot of news coverage of William Thomas, but here's the truth. Thomas had been a male swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania, and he had a lackluster swimming career, so he came up with a plan. He decided to give himself a female name. And soon, he started winning women's swimming competitions. So what do you call that? Well, you call it cheating. That's cheating. And Thomas's cheating was not a secret. It was obvious to everybody. But only Riley Gaines was brave enough to say something about it. She came on our show last July.
And that night, we watched Leah Thomas win a national title and blow all the other females completely out of the water. And that next day, we came back and the mood had shifted to where people were mad. The girls, you know, there were tears. These poor 9th and 17th place finishers who missed out on being named an All-American. There's extreme discomfort in the locker room. There's, you know, kind of these grumbles of...
Is he wandering around the women's locker room?
Yeah. And that's not something, we were forewarned about, which I don't think is right in any means, changing in a locker room with someone who has different parts.
So you can probably tell just from that clip that Riley Gaines is not an ideologue. She's not a political activist. She was a college swimmer and assumed that she would be just that, a college swimmer. But she was forced into a place where she had no choice but to tell the truth. She was not going to violate her own conscience. The story she told was almost hard to believe in a supposedly rational country, but it was real. And because nobody else had the courage to stop this trend before it accelerated, similar things began to happen all over American sports, and with predictable results. In November, the National Hockey League sponsored an all-trans draft tournament. A male cross-dresser was allowed to compete against women. What do you think happened? Well, during the game, the man lightly checked a woman into the boards and gave her a concussion. Yeah, because he's a man, she's a woman. In October, a North Carolina high school volleyball player suffered a significant head injury after another man dressed as a woman spiked a ball at her head. You can watch that on YouTube. It's on video. It's awful. But nobody should be surprised that it happened. 9 years ago, a man called Fallon Fox declared himself a woman and competed in a mixed martial arts fight against a competitor called Tamika Brents, who was a woman. In a total of 36 seconds on the mat, Fox fractured the bones in Tamika Brents' face and won the fight. As Tamika Brents later put it, quote, "I've never felt so overpowered in my life, and I'm an abnormally strong female." Well, yeah, because even an abnormally strong female, which she is no match for most biological men. Everybody knows that. It is measurable. We don't need to guess. But almost nobody at this point, at this deeply contemptible point of cowardice in the West, almost nobody will say that because they're afraid. But Riley Gaines will say that because she's not afraid. So last night, Gaines went to San Francisco State University to talk about her experiences in NCAA swimming. And Riley Gaines is not a hater. She is a measured, decent person who believes in logic and reason and finding common ground with people who disagree with her. She does not think she is God. But that fact, that she does not believe she's God, makes her a terrifying threat to the zealots who do believe they're God. And so at San Francisco State last night, the zealots attacked her. A mob surrounded Riley Gaines and prevented her from moving through the hallways. At one point, the thugs said they wouldn't let her pass unless she paid the money. During the chaos, a man dressed as a woman punched her several times. The mob howled with rage, screaming threats and obscenities. That's the most dangerous extremist group in the United States. There's no mistaking it. Riley Gaines, once again, is not an ideologue or a demagogue. She's not out to hurt anybody. She's a college swimmer who was cheated against and doesn't think that's fair. And in the face of that, people threaten her life and scream transparently nonsensical things like trans women are women. Trans women are not women. Women are women and men are men. And that's unalterable. And if you think otherwise, you are delusional. And they are delusional and therefore dangerous. Last night, Riley Gaines was silenced and assaulted at San Francisco State. Her most basic civil rights were stolen by a violent mob. The thing we're supposed to be on the lookout for, well, there it is. If there is such a thing as a hate crime, you just saw it. And yet the Biden administration and its thoroughly corrupt Department of Justice won't acknowledge that any of that happened, because they endorse it happening. Riley Gaines is one of the bravest people we know, and we're grateful to have her join us tonight. Riley Gaines, thank you so much for coming on. Was that as horrifying as it looked?
I mean, it was terrifying for me. The police did not inform me of any sort of action plan. Turning Point USA invited me to the campus. I delivered a very civil and respectful speech where I had great dialogue with even protesters who were participating in a sit-in. All of a sudden, after my speech, the room was stormed. The lights were turned off, and I was rushed with no one there to escort me to a safe place. I was punched, I was hit multiple times, I was shoved, until finally we exited the room. But we could not leave because the protesters flooded the halls, and so I was pushed into a classroom along that hallway where I was barricaded in for 3 hours.
3 hours? Why didn't someone with a gun come and bring you to safety?
Because they were terrified. They were scared to put their hands on these people because they know what these people are capable of. These people yelled obscene, violent, vulgar things to both myself and the officers, I could tell, didn't feel comfortable putting them in a position that would mean they do their job, which is a really scary, chilling thought.
This is the most dangerous extremist movement in the United States right now. It's getting bigger, not smaller. It's gaining steam, not losing it. The White House has endorsed it. I mean, what does this mean for you? And I just can't say it again since I happen to know you. You are an inherently moderate person who means harm to no one. But are you worried about your safety going forward?
You know, I am worried about my safety. I have to be now. When we have people who are willing to do this, and we know why they're willing to do this, it's because they don't have reason, they don't have logic, they don't have science, they don't have common sense on their side. That's on my side. And so they protrude by violence, whether it's physical or verbal violence. But what this means for me, this does not deter me. This assures me that I am doing the right thing. This will not silence me when they want me to be silenced. It just means I need to speak louder.
Really quick, did anyone in the state of California in authority, any political figure, for example, defend you?
No. Not the dean of students, not the campus police. I will say the city of San Francisco police that stepped in, they did a phenomenal job in escorting 3 hours later. But I will be pursuing legal action. I will ensure that the people who physically assaulted me, the people who put me in that position, they will face repercussions.
Yeah, I mean, if we can't identify that as evil, then we've really lost the thread. Riley Gaines, I'm glad you're still here, and
Absolutely.
Godspeed. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much.
So during the last outbreak of armed extremism, which of course was the BLM riots of 2020, an former Army sergeant called Daniel Perry was driving for Uber in Austin, Texas. He was an Uber driver. He's in his car, and a mob of rioters surround him in the middle of the street and begin hitting his car. One member of the mob was a man called Garrett Foster. Foster is a militant with a history of waving his rifle at people. He approached Perry's driver's side window with an AK-47. Then he raised the rifle, and when he did that, Perry shot and killed him in self-defense. The lead detective in the case and the Austin police concluded it was a justified shooting. If that's not a justified shooting, there's no such thing. But because Austin, Texas, the justice system is overseen by a Soros-funded DA, Perry was charged with murder for defending himself. And tonight, we are sad to tell you, this man, a military veteran driving an Uber car, was convicted of murder. And what does that mean? It means that in the state of Texas, if you have the wrong politics, you're not allowed to defend yourself. So this is a legal atrocity. It's so obviously unjust that tonight we extended an invitation to the sitting governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, to come on this show on Monday. And we wanted to ask if he was considering a pardon for Daniel Perry. But for some reason, Governor Greg Abbott's office told us he just can't make it and that we should talk to the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, instead. So that is Greg Abbott's position. There is no right of self-defense in Texas. We're going to keep trying to reach the governor of Texas, get his views on that, and the Attorney General for that matter. Well, rioters, including 2 elected Democrats, shut down the Tennessee State House last week. It looked like what they call an insurrection on CNN. So the Republicans in the State House just expelled the Democrats who participated in this insurrection. One Republican who voted for expulsion joins us. That's all ahead on our Good Friday special. Last week, rioters stormed the Tennessee State House. They shut down the government in the name of child genital mutilation and gun seizures. Some of the rioters also attacked police officers. Republicans in Tennessee who control the State House held Democrats to their own standard. This was an insurrection, and that's not allowed. So they expelled 2 Democratic Party representatives who participated in the insurrection. Yesterday, one of those lawmakers who was expelled, Justin Jones, attacked a Republican representative, of course, on the basis of his race.
What I told you was what you just exhibited. As the only member of their caucus who is not of the Caucasian persuasion, I said that you put a brown face on white supremacy.
Oh, please. So The man he was attacking was Representative Kumar, and he had a response to that. Here it is.
I'm an immigrant, everybody knows. I have been in this country for 53 years. I have never encountered a racial slur. I'm really not aware that any of that applies to me. I live a good life. Yet, you on tape called me a brown face. You walked up to me. You had no business coming up to me. You were sitting a row or two ahead of me. You shoved your finger in my face and said, Kumar, they will never accept you. You said it twice. It is disappointing that you have insulted this body. You have insulted your colleagues. You have insulted the House of Representatives in the state of Tennessee. You have insulted our speaker. You have personally insulted me.
Of course, they go immediately to race. Sabi, Doc Kumar is a representative from the state of Tennessee. He voted, as we told you, to expel Justin Jones and 2 other Democrats who participated in the insurrection. He joins us tonight. Representative Kumar, thank you so much for coming on. You said something poignant at the top. You said you've been in this country a long time, and you've never experienced a racial slur until this week.
That is true, Tucker. I have been here for 53 years, and I have practiced surgery. I've lived in Tennessee for 46 years, and people have been extremely kind to me. I was really surprised, and that these things should not happen, especially in a place where people are constantly guarding the values in such a way that discrimination and racism does not occur.
Well, it sounds like they're creating it. I mean, the dispute that you're having with Democrats has nothing to do with race that I can see, unless I'm missing something.
The problem really, I think we have to consider in the context of what happened in Nashville on March 27. You know, there was an unfortunate shooting at the Covenant Presbyterian Church. 6 people died, and it is the grace of the Covenant Presbyterian Church that instead of saying 6 people were killed, they count the shooter among those and said 7 people died. That is the community that we live in. That is the community that Nashville is, and people included the shooter among the casualties. And as important as time as it is for our community to allow for healing, to allow for understanding, before we move to plan on what can we do to avoid such violence within our society, these representatives took time to invite people, mobilize schools, bring thousands of children in, and create a situation that it became about them. It was not about any solutions. It was not about sympathy and mourning and other things that needed to be done. It really, they took it as an opportunity for political purposes to demonstrate and mobilize the people against the current administration. Then, in addition to that, not only were they satisfied with making it all about themselves, they went on to basically commandeer the House. They walked into the well of the main area within the House of Representatives, disrupted the function, started mobilizing and shouting and creating chaos within the House of Representatives to the point that business could not be conducted. They took the place hostage. And that is not the purpose. The idea was, again, to achieve that time of mourning, a time of healing, and go on to think solutions. And it's a frequent thing. Let's do something. Okay, let us take time to do something, but not make it about themselves.
Of course. Dr. Kumar, your decency comes right through the screen. And so without knowing a lot of the details, I'm definitely on your side in this debate, and we appreciate your explaining this story to us a little more tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the governor of Washington State, Jay Inslee, ordered all small businesses to close down during COVID. Big corporations that send the Democrats money stayed open, of course. But one brave barber, a rogue barber called Bob Martin, stood up to the tyranny of Jay Inslee's Washington. He kept his shop open even after the government ordered him to pay a $90,000 fine. That's $5,000 for every day he stayed open. When that didn't work, the state said they would take his license away. 2.5 years later, we thought it's time to check in on Bob Martin for an update. He's the owner of the Stag Barber Shop. He joins us now with a special guest. So you... Oh, wow, look at that. Jason Rantz, ladies and gentlemen.
I needed a haircut.
Well, he did a great job. So you, Bob, are still open despite... Clearly, you're a threat to public health, but you've kept your doors open. How'd you do that?
I respect the fact that some of these things could have been contagious, but I questioned this one. I didn't believe that it was true. And it turned out when the hospitals were getting paid thousands of dollars to claim that people died of COVID when it actually did not happen.
Yes.
And it was not legitimate. So I talked to the sheriff about it. He says, those edicts are not law. He says, mandates are not law. So I just figured, the heck with it, I'm going to go to work. I don't care whether they like it or not. I'm holding up to the Constitution. They don't have a right to take me off my working, taking care of my family. And I wasn't about to put up with that crap. So I'm here working, and I'm going to continue to work. They can't stop me from working.
I love that. If you don't mind, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Martin, how old are you?
82.
82.
I'm 82.
Well, I mean, you were a tribute to 82-year-olds. I'm sorry?
I spent several years in the Marine Corps. I'm not going to put up with a bunch of crap from these parasites down in Olympia. They're down here bleeding everybody, taking money away from them, and they don't want us to work. I'm not going to put up with that crap.
82, we've learned, is not too old to run for president. So if you do, I hope you'll announce on our show, because we would support you. And you got a great choice of clients there. Jason Rantz is one of our favorites. Jason Rantz, you look great, I have to say. Bob Martin, we just want to check in with you tonight. Obviously, you're thriving and telling the truth. Jason Rantz, great to see you. Thank you.
Good to...
So you just heard the barber from Washington State call the people who take your money parasites. Is that true? Well, the Biden administration just announced it's spending hundreds of thousands of your money for something called a homosaurus. Homosaurus. It's not a dinosaur. We'll tell you what it is and why you're paying for it after the break. Gender ideology isn't just the basis of the most dangerous extremist movement in the United States right now. It's also a grift. It's a way for people who couldn't actually make money doing anything because they have no useful skills to take a lot of money from taxpayers. The Biden administration is on board with this. They're the domestic Zelenskys, and has awarded $350,000 to the University of Washington to create a Spanish-language version of the homosaurus. So the homosaurus, in case you don't have it on your shelf, is a, quote, vocabulary of LGBTQ plus terms that include definitions for terms we cannot read on the air, because they're really, really graphic. The Washington Free Beacon broke down this story. We are joined by Clay Travis tonight, the founder of Outkick, co-host of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show. Clay, thanks so much for coming on. So why would you need, I mean, there's so many levels to this, but the most obvious is, why would you need a dictionary to define terms that are slang terms that people who use them can define on their own? Like, the point of this isn't really to make a dictionary, is it?
No, it isn't at all. And Tucker, I appreciate your staff thinking we're going to talk about the homosaurus. Let's make sure we get Clay Travis. He's an expert. And
in Spanish.
Also saw this. Yeah, in Spanish, no less. I'm very inclusive. I'm not kidding. When I saw this headline for the first time, my legitimate first thought was, even Jurassic Park has gone woke now. Hollywood has given up on all ideas, right? And that sounds, by the way, like the worst possible way to get killed by a dinosaur. I'll just toss that out there right now. But when you really break all this down, it is all so patently absurd. Look, I'm sure you saw the footage of Riley Gaines being attacked. Yesterday, Joe Biden tried to expand the definition of Title IX, Tucker, to include men. It is so unbelievable where we are right now. If you had just told people a few years ago that this would be going on, and it's symptomatic of what is going on with the Biden regime in general. We've got all of these people who were supposedly identity politics guaranteed spots, right? Whether it's Rachel Levine, whether it's Mayor Pete, whether it's Kamala Harris herself. And Biden has put together the largest group of incompetents ever in the history of the United States when it comes to administrations. Administrations so bad that they even make Joe Biden look not that bad, right? That's how bad his VP is. But ultimately, it is a government by checkbox. It's identity over talent. It's a refutation of the meritocracy. And it's all about this symbolic, talismanic absurdity, such as what you're talking about tonight, that they continue to focus on. Meanwhile, we might be on the brink of World War III with China and with Russia.
Yeah, ignore that because we've got a homeless source. I remember when liberals said they didn't want the government involved in your sex life, and I was kind of okay with that. Now all they talk about is your sex life.
Amen. You and me both.
Not yours.
No, I mean, it's unbelievable.
Hey, Travis, great to see you.
Thanks for trusting my expertise on this, Tucker. I'm an expert.
We couldn't think of anyone better.
I'm on it. Spanish.
Good to see you. So it is Good Friday, as we said at the outset of the show, which is the prelude to Easter, which is on Sunday, and it's a huge day on the Christian calendar. And so we thought, who could we talk to who could explain its meaning? And the first name that came to mind was Vince Everett Ellison. He joins us after the break. It is Good Friday. Some are still celebrating. We couldn't think of anyone better to deliver the message of this Easter weekend than our friend, documentary filmmaker Vince Everett Ellison. He's got a new documentary called Will You Go to Hell for Me? He joins us tonight. Vince, thanks so much for coming on. So it's Good Friday. What is the message, as far as you're concerned, of this day?
Oh, Tucker, it's the message of hope. Hope springs eternal here in America. Man, I was born on a cotton plantation in Haywood County, Tennessee. My father was a sharecropper. He brought us out of poverty through hard work, belief in Jesus Christ, and we went throughout the South singing gospel music. And we went all through America, and all we met was good people. Right now, I travel from Virginia to California, from Florida to New York, and I run into good people everywhere I go.
Yes.
And I think Easter is the time for people to reflect and remember what they believe. Jesus Christ died for our sins. We're Christians. Most of us are. 75% of white people, 85% of black people say that they're Christian. And in my documentary, I asked the question. I said, why do we not vote our values all the time? Why do we not live by our values? Why do we not live the way that we know we're supposed to live? You know, they're going to have this class at Howard where they're going to start trying to teach black people about the problems in America with black people and this and that and the other. And it's amazing to me because they think that there's a problem. Well, there is a problem, and this is the problem. We've forgotten who we are. And if you want to teach this class properly, all you got to do is tell these black children one thing. Turn away from the darkness, turn away from the hate, turn away from the envy, the jealousy, the screams of income inequality, social injustice, and turn back to Christ. And then say, class dismissed. And that'll be it.
I'm not holding my breath for them to do that. I want to go back a couple sentences. You said, and you are a sharp critic of contemporary America. You think a lot of things are going wrong, and I agree with you completely. But when you actually go out into the country and go from coast to coast, state to state, you mostly run into good people.
Oh, yeah, man. Great people. It's amazing because they want you to think the world is wicked, the world is unkind, the people are mean and dirty. I was sitting there with my daughter who was watching the 1619 Project the other day. I was white knuckle going all the way through it, right, because there was so much disinformation. And they had this part on it that talked about fear in black America, how police were killing black men. And I asked her a question. I said, how many black men you think were murdered by police last year, unarmed black men? She said, oh, about 9,000. And I showed her the statistics, and it was only 22. And it amazed her. I said, that's too many. But from what they're telling you, they want you to believe that America is wicked, is racist, is full of hate. And it's not. This is a beautiful country. And when we think about the hope that Jesus gave us when he rose from the dead, telling everybody, I have freed you, you're free. You're not under bondage of anyone now. Look to me and you will be fine. That's the message. Look to Jesus. Look to his resurrection. All things are possible to he that believes. And he said that I lay before you blessings and curses, life and death. Choose life so you and your children will live. So choose life. That's the message.
Vince Everett Allison, if you became an Episcopal minister, I would go back to church. It's great to see you tonight. And happy Good Friday.
Thank you, my friend. Happy Easter to you and your viewers and your family.
Thank you. So if you spend time in the outdoors, you may have seen the Deer Meat for Dinner YouTube channel. The man behind that channel joins us next to share some remarkable video of a triple iguana kill. Yes, that's a game meat too. That's next. Welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson sashayed into Washington yesterday, trying to sell lawmakers on a new world war. So naturally, as we told you last night, we invited him on this show. Boris Johnson is a famously articulate man. He's the kind of guy who can quote Aeschylus from memory in a dinner toast and still make you laugh. So we figured he was perfect. If there is one person on Earth who might plausibly explain how a war between nuclear-armed Western powers could benefit anyone but China, that man would be Boris Johnson. So he made the offer, and Johnson said he was interested in coming on. But then, a few hours before airtime, his publicist called to say that Boris Johnson wasn't coming. And that meant that Boris Johnson, reputed to be the smartest leader of any English-speaking country in the world, did not want to publicly defend his position on Ukraine. He was afraid to take questions about it. We found that disappointing. Not just because we had assumed Johnson was more impressive than that, but mostly because it is a subject that badly needs to be debated, and soon. Millions would die in the war that Boris Johnson is promoting. The public has a right to know, why are we doing this, before it starts? And as you can probably tell, it looks like it's starting very soon. So that was our experience with Boris Johnson yesterday. Given all that, we were shocked, actually shocked, this afternoon to see Johnson show up at a neocon think tank called the Atlantic Council and say this.
I've been amazed and horrified by how many people are frightened of a guy called Tucker Carlson. Has anybody heard of Tucker Carlson? What is it with this guy? All these wonderful Republicans seem somehow intimidated by his perspective.
All these cowards in Washington are afraid of this show, Boris Johnson said derisively. Yet somehow he never mentioned that he is one of them. Again, we had just invited Johnson on this show hours before he said that. It was remarkable and remarkably dishonest. We knew that Johnson himself was a coward. We watched during COVID as he transitioned into a terrified old woman. But we had no idea he was also a liar. We should have known. There is no popular support in this country or in any country in Europe for what Boris Johnson is now pushing. The overwhelming majority of people understand that a third world war would mean the destruction of the West. They don't want that. Why would they want that? They live here. Only the Chinese government wants that. And yet, despite that total lack of popular support, it looks like, as of tonight, we're going to have that war anyway. And that war will be waged, connoisseurs of irony will be delighted to know, in the name of, quote, democracy. We're going to have a war for democracy that nobody voted for or wants. Shouldn't we have a popular referendum on the war for democracy? No. It's almost hilarious, really. But it's sad, too. And you've got to wonder how it happened. A year after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we are much farther from a negotiated settlement and much, much closer to a nuclear conflict. How? Well, that happened because of lying. Dishonesty made it possible. Consider the amazing case of Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. Graham is the most aggressively liberal Republican in the U.S. Senate. On the two issues that define our moment, immigration and foreign policy, Lindsey Graham is strongly on Joe Biden's side. Lindsey Graham believes that Ukraine's borders are much more important than our own borders. Here he is last month demanding that American taxpayers, who were themselves being invaded even as Lindsey Graham was speaking, that American taxpayers must send M1 Abrams tanks to Zelensky and his wife. Watch.
We're almost in World War I type battle conditions in the east. It's impossible, in my view, to dislodge the Russians by the Ukrainians unless they have tanks. We also believe that longer-range rockets will help stop the counteroffensive that is building in the east. The goal is to dislodge the Russians from Ukraine by helping the Ukrainian military in that endeavor, give them the weapons they need to beat the Russians on the battlefield.
So there he is standing with fake war hero Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, who may be almost as liberal as Lindsey Graham. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't an impromptu press conference. It was part of a strategy. And not long after that, Joe Biden indeed dutifully sent the tanks. Now, Lindsey Graham is demanding that the Pentagon send F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. Arming the Ukrainian military with F-16s would mean direct American involvement in a war against nuclear-armed Russia. From there, it is a direct and possibly a very short line to a nuclear exchange. It is lunacy. True lunacy. But it's also Lindsey Graham's stated position. He's an utterly committed neocon. Neocon politics are what he cares about to the exclusion of everything else. He has no children. He's not worried about the future. But you knew that, of course. Here's the weird and revealing part, and the reason we're telling you all of this. Lindsey Graham is the most flamboyant neocon in the Senate, but he is also simultaneously a passionate Donald Trump supporter. In fact, Lindsey Graham is Donald Trump's #1 booster in the United States Senate. Well, that's bizarre. Whatever else he may be, Donald Trump is not a neocon. The neocons hate Donald Trump. They run from him as the devil hates holy water. Trump famously ran against the neocons, and then he mocked the neocons, and then he tried to fix the destruction they had wrought on America's foreign policy. He was the first Republican ever to criticize the Iraq War in the debate, remember where? South Carolina. And he won because of it. And then he criticized NATO. No one criticizes NATO. Trump criticized NATO. NATO is Donald Trump's obsession. He's talked about NATO for 10 years. Why are we funding NATO? NATO also happens to be Joe Biden and Lindsey Graham's instrument in the war against Russia in Ukraine. That's the opposite of Trump's position. And by the way, that position has not changed. Just today, Donald Trump released 2 videos on Truth Social, his social media app. One video was called "Why the Russia-Ukraine War Never Would Have Happened Under President Trump." And of course, that's true, it wouldn't have. And the other video was entitled "How to Restore Peace Through Strength." So that's Trump's position. Those are from today. Donald Trump represents everything that Lindsey Graham despises. In fact, to the point you'd think Graham would denounce him as a tool of Putin, as he has so often denounced others who disagree with him. You're a tool of Putin. But no, Lindsey Graham is not doing that. He's doing the opposite. Lindsey Graham is literally campaigning with Donald Trump for president. Here was Lindsey Graham at a rally on Saturday.
How many times have you heard, we like Trump policies, but we want somebody new? There are no Trump policies without Donald Trump. I was there. We live in a dangerous world right now. The good news for the Republican Party, there are many, many talented people for years to come, but there is only one Donald Trump.
There is only one Donald Trump. May his name live forever. So Lindsey Graham isn't just a booster, a supporter. He's a fanboy. Mr. Trump, will you sign my T-shirt? And if he felt that way, it'd be fine. When people feel that way, it's okay. We like Donald Trump. But here's the creepy thing. Lindsey Graham is not a Donald Trump fanboy. Lindsey Graham is an enemy of Donald Trump. And we know that not from what he says. Ignore what they say. Watch what they do. Always. This is the same Lindsey Graham who spent 4 years when Trump was president trying to undermine Donald Trump's biggest priorities on the biggest issues, immigration and foreign policy. At one point, Lindsey Graham said Trump's border wall wasn't real. It was a metaphor for border security. Oh, a metaphorical wall. He didn't want Trump to build an actual wall that would prevent actual people from invading an actual country. He wanted a metaphor. Okay, how'd that work? 7 million people later, not very well. Metaphors don't secure your country. And then on foreign policy, Graham became apoplectic when Trump said he wanted to withdraw troops from Syria. He called that decision, quote, a big win for ISIS, as if Trump was on the side of ISIS, as if Trump was supporting snuff videos. Right. So you know who they are inside by the nature of their attacks. Are the attacks fair? Or Are they ridiculous slanders on your character? Low people launch low attacks. And then at the height of the COVID pandemic, Lindsey Graham promoted sending billions to Pakistan, not to Baltimore, to Pakistan, because we need to help women open up bank accounts in a country where, quote, life is pretty tough. Oh, like it wasn't pretty tough here. Then Graham tried to sneak in an expansion of the EB-5 visa program into a pandemic aid bill. Now, what is the EB-5 visa program? Well, that's the program that gives green cards to rich foreigners who promise to invest money here. Half of those visa recipients come from China. So when Americans were losing their jobs thanks to a virus that came from China, possibly on purpose, Lindsey Graham was dutifully serving the interests of the Chinese ruling class. So whatever else you say about Lindsey Graham, he is the walking embodiment of neoliberalism. Ignore your own people, your own children, your own drug addicts living on the streets, your own dying middle class in favor of some theoretical act of virtue in a place you know nothing about. I'm a good person because I've helped people I've never met, even as my own people die. That is neoliberalism. That is Lindsey Graham. And yet, and here's where your head starts to spin, this same man is also campaigning on behalf of the America First candidate, Donald Trump. What? Shouldn't Lindsey Graham be campaigning for people he agrees with, like Mike Pompeo or Nikki Haley? You'd think so. But he was at a Trump rally at exactly the moment that Trump is fighting everything that Lindsey Graham is supporting. Literally, just today, Trump condemned Joe Biden for sending those M1 tanks to Ukraine.
Joe Biden's weakness and incompetence has brought us to the brink of nuclear war, and now Biden is doing what he said 10 months ago would lead to World War III. He is sending in American tanks. It's far past the time for all parties involved to pursue a peaceful end to the war in Ukraine before this already horrific catastrophe spirals out of control and ends up leading, indeed, to World War III. And this would be a war like no other war, because this would be a nuclear war.
Right. So Biden is sending in American tanks, Trump said. Well, yes, Biden is doing that. And he's doing it because Lindsey Graham and a whole lot of other Republicans in Washington, but most prominently Lindsey Graham, gave Biden the cover he needed to do that. So again, for the fifth time, what the hell is this? Why is Lindsey Graham on stage with a man he disagrees with on everything and apparently doesn't even like? Simple. Lindsey Graham believes that Trump may get the Republican nomination, and he is trying to control Donald Trump through flattery. Not through argument, or with facts and reason, as you do with adults, but with false praise. These are the politics of the late Ottoman court transplanted to Washington. Tell the ruler what he wants to hear so that you are free to subvert what the ruler wants. There is nothing uglier or more demeaning to all involved. Or by the way, less democratic. There's nothing more sinister than a flatterer. If you have a choice between a man who wants to punch you in the face or a man who's willing to tell you a lie and claim you're great, choose the guy with the cocked fist every time, because you are less likely to get hurt. Pedro Gonzalez is the author of Contra on Substack. He joins us tonight. Pedro, thanks so much for coming on. I don't know why. I mean, I don't think I'm not particularly smart. This is the most obvious thing I've ever seen. I don't know why no one says so out loud. I'm not even attacking Lindsey Graham for having his sincere views, which I think are sincere. I think they're wrong, but I think he means them. But I just can't believe that he would be on stage campaigning for a guy he despises. What is that?
Yeah. No, I think you're right, Tucker. I think it's flattery, but it's actually extremely pernicious, because guys like Graham can fly it under the radar precisely because they're viewed as bizarre and effete, but ultimately harmless. But that's anything but the case. Lindsey Graham is a snake who has built his career on selling out America. I mean, you just look at the donors to the leadership PAC that he founded. They're mostly defense contractors. And so it's no wonder that he's a booster for the war in Ukraine. Now, he won't fight that war because he doesn't want to break a nail, but he's happy to sell out the American national interest to Lockheed Martin and that European panhandler Zelensky. But this is a fundamental problem. Again, it's not something that you can just say, well, you know, it's Lindsey Graham. How much influence can he have? Well, a lot. That proposal that you mentioned about the EB-5 proposal, the EB-5 visa giveaway that would mostly go to wealthy Chinese investors, that got traction because Lindsey Graham was working on that with the Trump White House. The only reason that proposal died is because it happened at the same time as the coronavirus. You can't do a Chinese visa giveaway at the same time that you're talking about the China virus, right? So the influence that people like Graham can have through transactional politics, through flattery, dilutes the America First mandate and ultimately subverts it.
Boy, is that true. Sad to see, too. Pedro Gonzalez, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We should say, before this is a Fox News alert. We're just learning the FBI has searched Joe Biden's vacation house in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Fox's Trace Gallagher has that story for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker. The White House called today's FBI search of President Biden's Rehoboth, Delaware beach house a, quote, step in a thorough and timely process, but some say the word thorough is debatable. We know today a handful of FBI agents searched Biden's beach house for 3.5 hours, but you might recall the search on Mar-a-Lago back in August took all day and was conducted by 30 FBI agents. And when the White House calls today's search timely, it should be noted the classified documents at the Penn Biden Center were found back on November 2nd, meaning it's taken the DOJ 3 months to get to Rehoboth. And remember, after classified documents were found at Biden's Wilmington, Delaware home a few weeks ago, the president spent that weekend in Rehoboth. And while the FBI did not find classified documents at the president's beach house today, they did remove some materials and notebooks for, quote, further review. Legal analysts say it appears the DOJ wants to see if any classified information may have been transferred or written about in those notebooks. Meantime, despite the White House repeating ad nauseum that this process is transparent, we still have zero information about what the classified documents contain. All we know is that none of them were safely secured, although the White House might soon argue the documents were held inside a SCIF, which normally stands for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, but in this case would mean a 67 Corvette indoor facility. Tucker.
Amazing. You don't want the FBI at your beach house. That's just a rule of thumb. A lot of us live by the great Trace Gallagher. Thank you so much for that.
You bet.
So we should say at the top, we're pretty tough on Boris Johnson and Lindsey Graham, both of whom have redeeming qualities. And really, to some extent, it's not personal. Here's the point. We're moving towards something very, very serious, and there's no debate about it whatsoever. It just so happens, for whatever reason, this is one of the only places in the media that has raised questions about this coming war. Not because we love Putin. It has nothing to do with Putin. It has to do with America. The question is this good for America? And if so, how? And we have, over the last year, not been able to find a single person who's promoting this war who's willing to come on the show and explain how. It's that simple. And the public deserves that. It's not about us. And again, it's certainly not about Putin. It's about America. So Lindsey Graham and Boris Johnson and anybody else in Washington or any of their capital who's promoting this war is always welcome here to explain calmly and rationally why it's a good idea for us. Well, speaking of dictatorships in foreign lands, Canada, some believe Canada should be liberated. Liberating all these countries around the world, why not Canada? It's right there. You wouldn't even need weapons. You could do it with a pillow fight. Something to think about. We mentioned that on the air, because why wouldn't we? It's pretty obvious. And the Canadian Parliament is now in an uproar. It's so funny. We'll be right back. We're talking to our friend David Azarad recently for an interview on Fox Nation, and the topic of Canada came up. David Azarad was born and raised in Montreal, but like a lot of ambitious and freedom-loving people, he fled later to the United States. And because all the people who care about their own rights have left, Canada under Justin Trudeau has become effectively a dictatorship. And we don't like dictatorships. We're America. We liberate dictatorships. That's what we do. So we asked the obvious question, why don't we just liberate Canada? Here's that conversation. Why should we stand back and let our biggest trading partner, the country with which we share the longest border, and actually, I could just say a great country. I love Canada. I've always loved Canada because of its natural beauty. Why should we let it become Cuba? Like, why don't we liberate it? We're spending all this money to liberate Ukraine from the Russians. Why are we not sending an armed force north to liberate Canada from Trudeau? And I mean it.
Well, I don't know.
But you don't have to answer.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm there yet with you.
I'm just talking myself into a frenzy here. It's a fair question, and honestly, we thought the Canadians would be flattered because they're always flattered when you talk about them. They're like stalkers. You don't know they exist, but they've got pictures of you in their dorm room. So if you do a Canada joke on TV, they go absolutely crazy. They don't really know how to handle it or what it means, but it doesn't matter. They're excited. And that's true even in the Canadian Parliament. Apparently, there's so little going on in Canada, like civil liberties, that if you tell a joke about Canada, they go bonkers. Watch this Canadian, quote, member of Parliament try to get some kind of resolution passed condemning this show.
Forces liberate Canada from the current Prime Minister.
Unanimous consent.
By the way, it failed, and we don't want to be too picayune or anything, but we did not suggest the armed forces liberate Canada. You're flattering yourself, Canadian member of Parliament. We wouldn't need the armed forces. A couple of your college roommates just round up the sled dogs and you wouldn't be able to move. We're not actually going to do it just yet, but it's something to think about. Settle down. Well, another Blue Origin wiener ship is set to take off. This time, Jeff Bezos is sending his girlfriend into outer space. How should she feel about that? She'll have some special guests. Who could they be? To answer all these questions, we turn to our West Coast correspondent, Jason Rands, who joins us tonight. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Tucker. Lauren Sanchez is headed to space, leading an all-female crew in a phallic-shaped rocket ship erected by Blue Origin, which is an aerospace manufacturer founded by her billionaire boyfriend, Jeff Bezos. Now, this flight is scheduled for sometime in early 2024, and Sanchez will be joined by 5 other women as the Wiener rocket penetrates suborbital space. Now, the company already has performed 22 successful space flights. While we don't yet know the crew's identities, the 53-year-old Botox beauty did offer some hints to the Wall Street Journal, promising, quote, "It's going to be women who are making a difference in the world and who are impactful and have a message to send." Now, Sanchez and Bezos have been pretty mum on the details of this girls-only trip to space. And while Bezos won't be joining the flight, Sanchez does say that he is very encouraging. He's, quote, "thrilled we're putting this group together." Now, obviously, it's going to be a challenge for Sanchez, second only to convincing Jeff a prenup isn't actually necessary. But she does actually have flight experience. After she said Southwest rejected her as a flight attendant for being too heavy, this was back when they actually weighed job applicants, she became determined to get back in the air. She's a licensed pilot who learned to fly helicopters before starting Black Ops Aviation. This is an aerial film production company. Tucker, in the last few years, we have seen many historic firsts. The first black lesbian White House spokesperson, the first gay transportation secretary, the first non-binary klepto nuclear waste official. Now, the first billionaire girlfriend to fly into space with an all-female crew. If she is anywhere near as competent as the trailblazers I just mentioned, this is going to be a rocket trip to remember.
Jason, that sound you hear in the distance is a million glass ceiling shattering all at once. And I personally feel a little empowered by it. I appreciate your coming on tonight. Jason Rands, thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So we featured a number of people in our Employee of the Month segment, which we'll admit happens more than once a month. But this is one we especially love. Our next nominee is not a person, but an animal. Straight ahead. Cash and make everything digital, and digital currency is central bank digital currency. Obviously, you have no power whatsoever. If they don't like what you're doing, they just shut you down and you're impoverished. It just happened in Canada last winter, so we know what the consequences are. We know why they want it. So that couldn't happen, right? Well, we may live to see the day that it does happen. And here's the latest sign that it may be happening. The number of banks and ATM machines in this country are in steep decline. Far fewer than there were just a few years ago. And in some countries like Australia, they're going away at high speed. So this is not something that anyone voted on. This is something that they're just doing, whether you like it or not. So you can say we have cash, but if you can't get cash, then do you really have cash? So where's this going? That's the question we want to assess tonight. And we're going to with Catherine Austin Fitz, who has been monitoring this. She founded the Solari Report. She's also the Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and we're happy to have her. Catherine, thanks for coming on. So I think if you put this up to a vote nationally, most people would say, no, I may not use cash, but I'd like to have cash, because if there's no cash, then I have no control over my life. But it seems like this could be a way to affect the same outcome without a vote.
So, Tucker, the
one of the bedrocks of freedom is freedom to do financial transactions, including privately, or freedom to do where you want to do and wherever you want to do. And unfortunately, as the financial system has become more and more digital, you see more and more not only invasive surveillance, but more and more controls. You referred to Canada, perfect example. And the reality, as the financial system gets more controlling and more invasive, it's a little bit like bringing up a corral around us. And CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, and vaccine passports or digital IDs are sort of the last shutting of the gate. It's hard for many people to imagine the risks here because we're so used to living with financial transaction freedom, and we don't understand that when this gate closes on us, we literally will be sitting in a system where the central banks believe that our assets belong to them, and they can dictate where we can spend money and what we can spend money on. The important thing to understand is central bank digital currencies are not currencies. It's a financial transaction control grid, and it gives the ability for the central bankers, and they've said this publicly, the ability to not only set the rules centrally, but enforce the rules centrally. If you don't behave, you can have your money turned off.
You keep hearing people on television say cash is for criminals. Why would you need cash if you're not doing something bad? Why are so few financial journalists pointing out that actually if cash goes away, so does any power you might have had over your own life?
Well, I find a lot more journalists are beginning to understand and are beginning to not only write about this and talk about this, but do documentaries. We just had a new documentary done here out of the Netherlands called State of Control, which does a great job of explaining the invasive nature of this control grid. I think it's very hard for people who've grown up and enjoyed Western liberty and human liberty to imagine literally that we're going into a system where literally our homes, our cars, our communities become digital concentration camps. So if you've enjoyed liberty, it's very hard to, perceive this iceberg before you hit it. And that's why it's so important, and I commend you for talking about CBDCs, because we need to not let the propaganda persuade us that, one, this is convenient, or two, that we need this, or three, we need to understand not only the dangers of CBDCs, but the opportunities if we start to reverse financial tyranny. We've seen the financial system engineered using the federal credit to increase inequality and centralize political and economic control, and it's shrinking our wealth and it's shrinking our economy. We have debt growing and central control growing much faster than the GDP. That can be reversed. So the opportunity of rejecting financial tyranny and financial transaction control is so important. And all over the United States, there are great state legislatures working on legislation and passing legislation to protect our right to use cash, increasingly talking about state bullion depositories, state sovereign banks. There are many people doing this, and if you look at what they're doing, when it succeeds, it can really reinvigorate our economy. And so don't forget the opportunity of rejecting this.
Right. I think when people understand it, that's the first step. Catherine Austin Fitts, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
So Nikki Haley just announced she's running for president, an official announcement in a couple of weeks. It wasn't that long ago that Nikki Haley explained that immigrants are more patriotic than you are. She also endorsed the BLM riots. She said George Floyd's death, quote, needs to be painful for everyone. So we thought it'd be interesting to speak to someone who has worked for Nikki Haley to know what she's like, since she wants to run the country. Justin Evans is the CEO of Evans Public Affairs. He's her former political director. He joins us now. Justin, thanks so much for coming on. So you know Nikki Haley well. She hired you. You worked intimately with her in politics. What's your reaction to her announcement that she's going to run for president?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you having me on, Tucker. It's great to see you again. It's going to be a long road for Nikki. She's running fourth in South Carolina, and quite frankly, it's no surprise to anybody that she's running for president. She's been running for president ever since she was elected governor in 2010. So her announcement on February 15, I don't think is going to move the needle in any kind of meaningful way. And in fact, I'd go so far as to make a prediction here. I don't think she ends up being on the ballot. I think she understands that her capital, her vice presidential capital runs out if she doesn't perform well in her own home state. So I think it's going to be a long road for her. A lot of people are asking, like, what's up with all these political inconsistencies that we've seen out of her lately? And one of those is with her support for the former president. I mean, she's been so inconsistent on that and flip-flopped on that so often that people are starting to confuse her with Mitt Romney at this point. As it relates to her time in South Carolina, she likes to tell people that she's never lost an election. Well, on the ballot, that may be true, but Tucker, she's also never finished a job. Whether it was her time as governor, her time at the UN, or her time at Boeing, she's got a demonstrated pattern of behavior that she just walks away when times get tough. So it's going to be a tough road for her to hoe here, and she's going to have a lot of trust that she has to build back up with taxpayers. And speaking of taxpayers, on that regard, when she was a House member, she voted for tax increases, and when she was a governor, she architected one of the largest tax increases in the history of the state of South Carolina. As far as foreign policies, sorry?
Justin Evans, unfortunately, we're out of time, but we will see you again as her campaign continues. I appreciate your perspective, having worked for her. We'll be right back. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. You know you're living in a non-democracy when it's dangerous to displease the ne'er-do-well children of the supreme leader. If you were, for example, at a red light in pre-invasion Baghdad and Uday Hussein came screaming up behind you drunk in his Lamborghini, you got the hell out of the way, and you did not complain about it. And you didn't complain about it because Uday's dad ran the place, and you did not want to make him mad. You might wind up like the members of his personal soccer team who dared to miss penalty kicks. That's what third world countries are like. All citizens are not equal in countries like that. Power derives from proximity to power. And that means the second most powerful people in a country like that are the children of the president. And very often they don't have jobs and are addicted to something. That's the way it works in places like that. And for a long time, that system seemed very foreign to most Americans. They were used to living in a democracy. They could barely even imagine it. But then, during the last presidential campaign, Joe Biden's daughter abandoned her diary somehow in a house she was staying at in Florida after she got out of rehab. And in that diary, Ashley Biden recounted how her father had taken showers with her when she was young, and she attributed her later sexual compulsions to that experience with her father. So by any standard, that seemed like clear evidence of abuse. And yet no law enforcement agency, so far as we know, ever asked Joe Biden about it. Instead, once Joe Biden became president, his FBI raided the home of journalist James O'Keefe and seized the evidence. Ashley Biden's diary was taken by force and has never been seen again. So the message was unmistakable. When Uday Hussein blows by in his Lamborghini, get the hell out of the way, peasant. Princelings have power, you do not. By the way, Hunter Biden's whole life has been a monument to that message. Despite a decades-long drug problem and no record of legitimate achievement of any kind, Hunter Biden has managed to accumulate the highest possible academic credentials. Georgetown and Yale Law. Don't try that at home. As well as what appears to be millions and millions and millions of dollars. How did he do that? You couldn't do it, but then you're not Joe Biden's son, and that's how he did it. He cut business deals with corrupt countries that his father was conducting diplomacy in as vice president of the United States. And then we know from evidence that he apparently planned to kick back some of that money to his father as part of the deal, 10% for the big guy. Now that's completely illegal. And yet neither Hunter Biden nor his father Joe Biden have ever been indicted for doing that. Instead, and here's the best part, the real criminals, we learned yesterday, are the people who dared to talk about it. Yesterday, Hunter Biden's legal team released a letter demanding that Joe Biden's friends imprison anyone who criticizes Joe Biden's son. So these letters call on the Department of Justice, which Joe Biden controls, and Delaware Attorney General Kathy Jennings from Joe Biden's state to file criminal charges against Republicans who dared to possess and share the contents of his son's now famous laptop. And that list would include, among others, John Paul McIsaac, the owner of the Mac repair shop where Hunter Biden abandoned said laptop. According to Hunter Biden's high-paid lawyers, John Paul McIsaac should be in prison for doing this. Quote, Mr. McIsaac chose to work with Donald Trump's personal lawyer to weaponize Mr. Biden's personal computer data against his father, Joseph R. Biden. In other words, John Paul McIsaac didn't want Joe Biden to become president, and apparently that's now a federal crime. But wait a second, back up a second. Does that mean we can now say with certainty that the laptop is real? If we can say that, that means that Adam Schiff, who's now running for Senate in California, had better issue a statement pronto correcting his previous categorical claims about the laptop. Here was Adam Schiff in October of 2020 when he chaired the House Intelligence Committee.
Does it surprise you at all that this information Rudy Giuliani is peddling very well could be connected to some sort of Russian government disinformation campaign?
Well, we know that this whole smear on Joe Biden comes from the Kremlin. That's been clear for well over a year now, that they've been pushing this false narrative about the vice president and his son.
We know this comes from the Kremlin, Adam Schiff said. And of course, Adam Schiff would know, since he, unlike you, had access to top secret information. You weren't allowed to see it. He did see it, and on the basis of that knowledge told you it was from the Kremlin. And it's exactly what dozens of former intel officials told you. They saw the evidence, and this was from Russia. So now it looks like they were all lying. According to Hunter Biden's lawyers, quote, Mr. McIsaac unlawfully shared Mr. Biden's property with third parties. His property, he owned it, it was his. Yes, the laptop, according to Hunter Biden's lawyers, belonged to Hunter Biden. It did not come from the Kremlin. That's settled. Except, wait, no, it's not settled. Because today we got yet another statement from Hunter Biden's lawyers, and they seem to revise the first statement. Here's today's statement, and we're quoting. These letters do not confirm McIsaac's or others' versions of a so-called laptop. They address their conduct of seeking, manipulating, and disseminating what they allege to be Mr. Biden's personal data wherever they claim to have gotten it. So in other words, we believe the government should send these people to jail for possessing stolen property that belonged to Hunter Biden, but that so-called property may not actually exist and may not even belong to Hunter Biden. That's their argument. It's a novel legal theory, actually. In fact, it's so novel, it's totally incoherent. It's like prosecuting somebody for stealing your imaginary car. But even if we can agree that the laptop is real and not a deep fake produced by some diabolical Russian AI program, and again, neither Hunter Biden nor his lawyers have conceded that yet, maybe they will tomorrow. But even if we could all agree on that, there is another more fundamental problem. And it's this. Hunter Biden signed an agreement acknowledging that if he left his device at John Paul McIsaac's repair shop in Delaware for more than 90 days, if he didn't pick it up, he would forfeit ownership of it. He wrote that. No one disputes that he did. And then Hunter Biden violated the contract that he signed. And he violated it because he was a crackhead who was having an affair with his sister-in-law, at least 3 of his employees, and countless strippers and hookers, while at the same time trying to execute on illicit business deals with the Chinese. So he just didn't have time to return for his laptops. That makes sense. He was very busy. John Paul McIsaac, meanwhile, being the small business owner, called Hunter Biden again and again and tried to give the laptop back. But Hunter Biden was so busy, he ignored John Paul McIsaac. Watch.
He sort of disappears on you. So he disappears and never comes for that external hard drive that now maintains the data?
So now I'm in possession of his laptop, a backup of his laptop's home folder on an external drive that he provided, and no sign of Hunter. I think I called him again the following weekend or right before the end of the month. I always call customers at the end of the month to collect on out of delinquent bills. And then I think I called him a couple more times over the next month after that. So just no response.
Kept calling him. He was smoking too much crack with too many hookers. He didn't call me back. That was John Paul McIsaac's explanation. So it's kind of hard to blame John Paul McIsaac for this. He tried his best to return the laptop. And yet they are blaming him. In fact, Hunter Biden is demanding the Delaware Attorney General, Kathy Jennings, put that guy, John Paul McIsaac, in jail for what he did. On what grounds? Hunter Biden is the president's son. If he smokes too much crack to follow the terms of the contract he signed, that's not his problem. It's yours. Now, in a normal country, a normal prosecutor would laugh at an argument like that. But Hunter Biden is betting that Delaware Attorney General Kathy Jennings will take that argument very seriously, and he has reason to believe that she will. Because Kathy Jennings is not just the Attorney General, she is a longtime party hack ideologue who can be counted on to faithfully do the bidding of Democratic leaders and donors. And even better than that, Kathy Jennings is a longtime friend of the Biden family. In fact, she once worked for Hunter Biden's brother, Beau Biden, and she worships his father, Joe. We're not guessing. Here's a Facebook post from the now Attorney General of Delaware, Kathy Jennings, dated April 25th, 2019. We're quoting, "I've known Joe, Jill, and the Biden family for most of my life. Joe is one of the kindest, most genuine people I've ever known. Democrats are blessed with many excellent candidates this year, and I am proud of those choices and what they say about our party. I'm choosing Joe because nobody understands more what it means to heal, and right now, that's what America needs." Well, right now, the Biden family needs something very different, and Kathy Jennings may be willing to provide it. Again, this is the person that Hunter Biden's lawyers are calling on to send John Paul McIsaac to jail, and she very well may send him there. Doesn't seem like a fair fight, really. So here you have John Paul McIsaac, a small business owner who lives in a small, corrupt state controlled by the Biden family. He's the peasant in this scenario. And then you have Hunter Biden is the princeling. So with no obvious means of support, Hunter Biden has been living in a $20,000 a month spread in Malibu and can someone tell us how, afford a team of the most expensive attorneys in the United States of America. How is he doing that? We don't know. We can say one of these guys has a strong advantage in this battle, and it's not the little guy. So we wondered what John Paul McIsaac thinks of this. He's the author of American Injustice. He joins us now with his lawyer, Brian Della Rocca. Thanks to you both very much for coming on. John Paul McIsaac, just to you first, and the obvious question. So here, you really are the little guy in this case. You're literally a small business owner, and you're being threatened by the family that runs the country. Are you intimidated by this? You must be a little bit.
I'm a little bit, but you got to remember, Tucker, I've been dealing with intimidation from all fronts for the last couple of years, so I've kind of gotten used to it. This isn't as bad as being accused of being a traitor and working with Russia to affect an election, but it's pretty close.
So I would assume, as a small business owner, when someone drops a device off for you to repair, you want them to pick it up so you can get paid. I mean, I assume you didn't want to take possession of these devices, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm in the business to recover data or repair and fix these products, and I want to get paid for these jobs, and I didn't. Yeah, but that's your fault now? Apparently it is.
I want to ask your attorney a question as an attorney. And so Hunter Biden has hired, among many others, a man called Abbe Lowell, who's a longtime Democratic lawyer, well-regarded among lawyers, extremely expensive, probably one of the most expensive attorneys in the United States. Do you have any idea how Hunter Biden, who doesn't have a job that we know of, who's all kinds of claims against him, baby mama among others, how is he affording Abbe Lowell?
Well, that's the question that I have as well. Way beyond that, how many attorneys does he need? He's got Abbe Lowell. He's got attorneys representing him in quite a few of his criminal matters. How many does he need? And the fact that Abbe Lowell actually went along with this letter, which really produced a lot of lies about John Paul, saying that John Paul accessed the information without Hunter's consent, when we have shown Hunter's consent. Everyone knows Hunter consented. The fact that this attorney would participate in this is, I just don't understand it.
Well, I mean, clearly this is not about Hunter Biden. Obviously, I'm guessing here, I have no knowledge that I'm not disclosing. But if a lifelong crackhead who's fighting, a million different battles on a million different fronts and doesn't appear to have a job can afford Abbe Lowell and a stable of other attorneys, this is clearly an effort by the Democratic establishment, by donors, to crush you guys for political reasons. Is that an unfair assumption?
Well, that's exactly, that was the first thing I thought of. I received no notification of these letters until someone from CBS contacted me yesterday. I was in the car and they asked for a comment, and I had no idea what they were talking about. When I read the letters, I was appalled. This is really someone with so much money, or acting like they have a lot of money, going after someone who is really the little guy. And he's doing it on purpose. He's trying to intimidate. And it's interesting to me that this happened when it did, because as you may know, we filed a lawsuit against numerous parties, CNN, Politico, but one of the parties is Hunter Biden. It was very difficult to find where he was. He was in D.C. for a couple weeks, and he was moving around. Well, we finally tracked him down, and we were able to serve him last week. And now, all of a sudden, we see this. When there was always talk of, Hunter's going on the offensive, he's going after Rudy, he's going after all the...
Right.
Never a mention of John Paul. And then all of a sudden, two of the letters, the primary, most of the paragraphs, most of the description in the letters are John Paul.
Right. Well, right. Always pick the poorest guy to destroy. Uday and Kusei drive into you drunk, and you're the one who gets punished for it. But, Godspeed to you both. I appreciate it. John Paul McIsaac and Brian De La Rocca. Thank you, both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we haven't watched a ton of cable news recently, but we assumed with mass layoffs underway across the U.S. economy, an egg shortage, crumbling cities, the prospect of a third world war looming on the near horizon, we assumed we knew what the other channels would be covering, because there are an awful lot of threats out there. What we didn't know until we tuned into MSNBC and CNN the other day was that all of those threats go by a single name. And that name is Mr. George Santos. George Santos. Weeks into his new job as a freshman member of Congress, and just months from his previous life of near total anonymity, George Santos has somehow transformed into the single most dangerous and historically significant figure on the global stage today. George Santos is like 9/11 in human form. Nothing will ever be the same now that George Santos is here. You will never forget the moment you first saw George Santos. Where were you when George Santos was elected? It's a story you will tell your grandchildren. Watch.
On Capitol Hill, this is George Santos's reality. It seems almost every day there are new questions about the freshman congressman's past, some stretching back more than a decade.
Can you keep up with all the Santos lies and controversies? He is now out-trumping Trump in terms of flooding the zone with excrement.
Not just saying that he played volleyball, but he had a scholarship, that he slayed teams from Harvard and Yale.
A perfect portrayal of self-loathing, that he clearly is so disgusted with himself and so disgusted with the life that he's led, a life of lies, a life of fables.
People didn't decide because they thought he was somebody totally different. It was a lie and a fraudulent election. He has to resign.
Not a volleyball champion, and he doesn't appear to be a champion of the people either. The voters did not elect you, Mr. Santos. They elected a version of you invented by your imagination. Sadly, George Santos represents so much that is wrong today. Lies, denial, and the death of shame.
It was a stolen election. It was a stolen election. You heard Adam Kinzinger say it. And CNN filled in the blanks. It's not just that George Santos claimed that he once played volleyball in college. Played volleyball in college. It's worse than that. Indescribably worse. George Santos told other people out loud, and CNN can exclusively confirm this, that he had a volleyball scholarship, perhaps the most coveted credential in collegiate sports. But he didn't. It was all a facade. It was a tissue of lies constructed to deceive the American people. There was no volleyball scholarship. There was not a single dollar of volleyball scholarship. George Santos made it all up out of whole cloth, out of thin air. George Santos is an ersatz volleyball player, a fraud, a ghoul. People voted for this man believing he had played collegiate volleyball on a scholarship, and he hadn't. And yet tonight, ladies and gentlemen, this thief of volleyball glory strides the halls of the United States Congress unimpeded by law enforcement. It's like another insurrection. And by the way, we are hearing tonight, we can't confirm this, but we're continuing our investigation in George Santos, There are reports tonight that he did not actually work at Citibank. He did not work at Citibank. No volleyball scholarship, never worked at Citibank. What percentage of the people who voted for George Santos under false pretenses would have done so had they known he never played volleyball and never worked at Citibank? We can only guess, obviously a very small percentage. So ignore the Chinese spy balloon, ladies and gentlemen. George Santos. There is, by the way, a Chinese spy balloon flying over the United States. The Pentagon does not want to shoot it down. Why would you want to shoot a Chinese spy balloon down? That seems mean and racist. Why aren't they shooting it down? George Santos! George Santos! We'll have more on it next. So a woman called Ilhan Omar has been on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Omar came to this country from Somalia, and then she proceeded to make it very clear she doesn't like the country she settled in. According to DNA evidence, she also married her brother in order to commit immigration fraud, something that obviously happened for which she's never been punished. So today, for a bunch of reasons unrelated to that, the House voted to expel Ilhan Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee. And in response, the theater kids in the squad completely lost emotional control. For real. Watch this.
This is about targeting women of color in the United States of America. Don't tell me, because I didn't get a single apology.
Time has expired.
When my life was threatened. Thank you.
Let me make gentlewoman's time is expired.
Ilhan Omar is right where she belongs.
The gentlewoman's time is expired.
Is needed on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Her clarity, conviction,
the gentlewoman's time is expired and she is no longer recognized.
The GOP is now doing what it is best at: weaponizing hate against a black, beautiful Muslim woman.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Omar will not be silenced.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Omar,
the gentlewoman's time has expired.
That our country is failing you today through this chamber. You belong
the gentlewoman is no longer recognized.
Wow. These people are really troubled. It really is the party of weak men and angry women. What to make of this? Adam Carolla is an expert on this kind of behavior due to his many years in television and comedy. He's host of the Adam Carolla Show. He joins us now. I mean, you have worked in the entertainment business, for many decades. You've seen emotionally incontinent people. How would you compare them to what you just saw here?
It would take many of them to make one AOC.
What? By the way, how is she a person of color? She's whiter than I am. It's like insane.
Well, okay, so that's a good subject, which is, I've said for a long time, it's never been a better time to be an actual racist, because you could just hide amongst everyone who's being accused of being a racist, which is everyone in America who's not a person of color. They're hysterics. They're also setting the movement back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they seem incompetent. They seem insane. They seem hysterical. Like,
But I thought you weren't supposed to. So, and I actually like and respect women, just saying. And you were not supposed to call women hysterical because that's a stereotype. But then Rashida Tlaib gets up and behaves in a way that can only be described as hysterical. She's literally in a state of hysteria.
If this was a co-pilot on your commercial flight, you would get off of the plane, right? You would go, I don't want this nut job anywhere near a yoke. That's... So obviously, but it's kind of our fault. Like, if you really think about it, like, COVID was our fault. Yes, we have horrible leaders, horrible politicians, Fauci, CDC, Rochelle Walensky. We listened to them. We yelled at our own citizens to put a mask up. We didn't have to do it. We could have done it if we stood up. And it's the same way with racism. They bang the racism drum at every moment of the day, and we buy into it. We back off. We don't want to talk about the race hustlers that are out there that are constantly doing this. It's our fault. We're letting this very small minority do this to us because everyone is so scared of being called a COVID denier, a vax denier, a racist denier. Like, we're so freaked out that we let these nut jobs take control and then run amok.
She married her own brother. Okay, so that would seem like the headline. I don't understand how you could write a news story about Ilhan Omar, whatever you think of reviews, and not say Ilhan Omar, comma, who married her own brother, comma.
But if you did that, you'd be called a racist.
Well, I think every culture is against marrying your own brother. I don't think that's like an Anglo thing.
No, it's you are critiquing a woman of color, and thus you are a racist.
Oh, universal standards are racist.
Yes, yes. It's a default setting.
So can I just ask one question? So if you're Rashida Tlaib, do you go home, and of course she's looking at the tape of herself because she obsessively Googles herself. People like that always do, narcissists always do. And do you see your own performance where you literally start crying over a committee assignment and say, you know, I'm a brave, bold, competent woman?
I can't imagine that. I mean, I imagine when she goes home, she first has to feed her 19 cats, and then she can hop on the computer and watch this horrible, pathetic performance. In a victim culture world, she gets an Oscar for that. So that, you know, we're coming from a different generation where you would yell at someone, get a hold of yourself, woman. Have a shot of brandy. Pull it together. You're a leader. You're making a fool of yourself. But now we're in a victim culture reward center now, and we're handing it out. So she gets an Emmy for that.
Last quick question. The 19 cats, like they judge that, don't they, secretly, that kind of behavior?
Tabbies do.
They do, right?
Yes.
People think their cats don't judge them. They're lying to themselves.
Oh, they see right through your soul.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Adam Carolla, great to see you tonight. Thank you. Well, air travel's gotten very, very tough. COVID's gone, but it's very hard to rely on commercial airlines to get you from one place to another. What is happening exactly? Well, we have found a commercial airline pilot brave enough to join us next and help us understand what is going on. We'll be right back. This big, you really need reliable air travel just to function, but our air travel, commercial air travel, is degrading clearly, and if you've tried to use it recently, you know that. No one says it, but it's very, very obvious. And a big part of that is the COVID mandates. Air traffic controllers and pilots were told they had to be vaccinated, had to wear masks, and anyone who didn't was punished for it. And we are still feeling the effects of that. Jeff Chandler is a commercial airline pilot who refused to get vaccinated or wear a mask, and in the end, he won, amazingly. He's still flying, thank God. Jeff Chandler joins us now. Jeff, thanks so much for coming on, for your bravery and coming on tonight. And congratulations on your victory over the insane mandates. If you could sum up what you think is going on with our commercial air travel system, how would you?
Good evening, Tucker. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Happy Groundhog Day. First, let me say happy birthday to my beautiful wife. You're amazing. I love you, and have a great time in Charleston. Secondly, these are my opinions. I don't speak for anybody, and I certainly don't speak for the company that I work for, nor do I represent them tonight. As we know, the mask mandate caused a lot of trouble and grief, and we all knew that it was illegal. And from the beginning, we couldn't express that it was illegal because we really didn't know what we were looking for. But now, thanks to a good friend of mine, I consider my brother, I call him Captain Cross, that's his superhero name. He unearthed the mother of all public policies, the MOAP. It's the Federal Aviation Act of 1958. And in that act, Congress declared to exist a public right of transit. They created the FAA, and the FAA created the policies to safeguard and ensure and promote safety in air travel and air commerce. So that's the law right there. Now, the biggest part of that law is actually Section 301. In that one, it establishes the authority of the administrator. And it says the administrator shall not submit his decisions for the approval of, nor be bound by decisions or recommendations of any board, committee, or any other organization created by executive order. So the FAA administrator has full unilateral authority to make all decisions regarding air travel. Now, when former Administrator Dixon went before the Senate and he said that masking would not be regulatory mandates, that was the line in the sand that they drew. They said no, and that should have stuck, but everybody tried to enforce it anyway. And what's interesting is if you look at the FAA Reformation and Modernization Act of 2012, Section 829 dictated that the FAA and OSHA declare and corroborate on an MOU. In August of 2014, the FAA put out that MOU, and it said that OSHA could regulate some of their occupational safety hazards affecting air crew members on aircraft, except for flight deck crew. So pilots were carved out, and there's no way that they could mandate that against pilots. It was illegal.
Yeah, and the result, this deserves a much longer conversation. I apologize for lack of time. I didn't fully get all of that, but it's clear that the response to COVID is the core reason that people can't seem to get to LA on time. Jeff Chandler, I appreciate it. I hope you'll come back. Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
So all politicians have people who imitate them, who do impressions of them. Kamala Harris is one of the few who really doesn't, And that's because Kamala Harris herself is doing a Kamala Harris impression. There is no actual Kamala Harris. And so it's kind of a meta question. It's very tough. It's very difficult to pull off the rambling incompetence and the cackling. But we have searched the entire continental United States for someone who can do it, and we have found one. Watch this.
Before we get to all that, I am Kamala Harris. My name is Vice President Kamala Harris, first woman VP. My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman sitting at the table wearing a blue suit. My pronouns are she and her. Fee, fi, fo, fum. I'm wearing a blue suit, one of many. My pants are Old Navy, and school buses are yellow.
Because think about it, yellow school buses are our nation's largest form of mass transit.
Yeah, largest form of mass transit. So clearly, the impersonator you saw, whose name is Esty, has the kind of faintly hallucinogenic quality down, but it's the cackle that she really nailed. She joins us now. Esty, thank you so much for coming on. The cackle, can you just do that again? I think you perfected it.
Hello, America.
Yeah. What? I don't know. I don't know if I don't know if you live with others, roommate, spouse, friends, whatever. When you do that cackle around other people, like how do they respond?
Sometimes they leave the room. It really depends on what team they're playing for, but for the most part, it turns heads for sure. I think I fine-tuned it down to get it to sound just like her.
Just for masochistic reasons, can you do one more time? It's so perfect. So the State of the Union is coming up next week. Do you have a preview for us?
Well, Tucker, I really want to make sure that we can galvanize our time. And when we get there, we want to lead Joe into the passage of time, but really we don't want it to be too much into the passage. We're going to have a Venn diagram explaining everything, and hopefully there will be yellow school buses.
Does it change the way you feel about yourself that you're able to do something like this?
Well, it started very, very differently for me. I downloaded TikTok during the pandemic, like many other very bored Americans, amongst other people around the world. And one of the followers told me that I had actually sounded like her, and I replied to the video. And after that, the requests just kept on coming in. And given her content and all the great, wonderful speeches that she's given, I haven't run out of any content yet. So
no, and you never will. Peace be upon her. We're going to go out of this with an actual Kamala, Carmela, whatever, cackle, just so our viewers can see how perfect your imitation is. Esty, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And here's the real thing.